Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The sound of jingling keys echoes through the concrete corridor as I make my way to the evidence room. It's 11:47 p.m., and I'm alone in the basement of the precinct. 31 years I've been doing this job, and I still can't sleep some nights. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting that sickly yellow glow that makes everything look like it's already dead. My name's Frank Morrison, and I'm the evidence custodian for the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. Been keeping track of other people's nightmares for 3 decades now. Most folks think my job is just filing and cataloging, checking items in and out, making sure the chain of custody stays clean. But when you spend enough time down here, surrounded by the remnants of crimes that'll never be solved, you start to understand that some evidence carries more weight than others. The heavy door creaks open, and I step into the main storage area. Row after row of metal shelving stretches into the shadows, each shelf lined with boxes, bags, and containers holding pieces of lives that got torn apart. The air down here is always cold, always stale, with that faint smell of old paper and something else. Something I can't quite name but have learned to live with. Tonight, I'm looking for case file 2019-0847. Been avoiding this one for months, but Internal Affairs wants a full inventory review, and I can't put it off any longer. The box should be on shelf 7C, right between a collection of counterfeit bills from a case that went federal, and a bag of women's jewelry from a home invasion where the homeowner never came forward to claim it. My footsteps echo as I walk deeper into the room, past the newer cases with their bright evidence tags and computerized tracking labels. The older stuff is kept in the back, cases from before we went digital, before DNA testing was standard, before a lot of things that might have changed the outcomes. I find the box right where it should be. Plain brown cardboard about the size of a shoebox, with 2019-0847 written in black marker on the side. The case details are handwritten on a yellow label that started to peel at the corners. Found property. Origin unknown. No complainant. That's police speak for we have no idea where this came from or who it belongs to. I pull the box from the shelf and set it on the metal cart I use for transporting evidence. The fluorescent light above me flickers, casting dancing shadows across the concrete walls. In the distance, I can hear the building's heating system cycling on, a low rumble that seems to come from deep in the earth. Let me tell you how this case started. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and Detective Sarah Chen brought the box down to me personally. That was unusual. Usually evidence gets processed through the intake desk upstairs. But Sarah had this look on her face, like she'd seen something that bothered her more than it should have. "Frank," she said, setting the box on my desk, "I need you to log this in. But I want you to know there's something not right about it." The box had been found in a storage unit that had been abandoned for over a year. When the facility manager finally cut the lock and opened it up, expecting to find the usual collection of forgotten furniture and old clothes, he found just this one box, sitting alone in the center of the otherwise empty unit. That should have been the end of it. Abandoned property gets cataloged, held for the required period, then disposed of according to regulations. But Sarah couldn't let it go. She kept coming back to my desk, asking to review the contents again, pulling out those photographs and studying them like they held some secret she couldn't quite grasp. I should have paid more attention to the way her hands shook when she handled them, the way she started looking over her shoulder more often after that Tuesday morning. Sarah Chen had been a good detective for 8 years, solid and professional. She'd worked everything from domestic violence to armed robbery without batting an eye. But this box changed something in her, and I was too busy with my own work to notice until it was too late. The first time I really looked at the contents, really looked, was about a week after Sarah brought them down. I was doing my evening inventory, and the box was sitting on my desk where I'd left it, waiting for me to complete the paperwork. I opened it up, expecting to find the usual collection of personal effects. Maybe some old documents, family photos, the kind of sentimental items people store away and forget about. Instead, I found something that made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't quite articulate. The photographs were arranged too neatly, face up in a precise grid pattern. The documents were organized by date, written in the same careful handwriting throughout. And that little digital recorder was placed in the exact center of the box, like it was the most important item of all. I opened the box now, 6 months after that conversation with Sarah. The contents are exactly as I remember them. A collection of photographs, some documents, and a small digital recorder. Nothing that should be particularly disturbing, but there's something about the way they're arranged. Too neat, too intentional. The photographs are what got to Sarah, I think. They're not crime scene photos or anything like that. They're just pictures of ordinary people going about their daily lives. A woman getting coffee at a drive-thru. A man walking his dog in what looks like a suburban neighborhood. A teenage girl waiting at a bus stop, backpack slung over her shoulder. But here's the thing that makes your skin crawl. Every single person in these photographs is looking directly at the camera. Not posing for it, not smiling, just staring with this expression that's hard to describe. Like they knew they were being watched but couldn't do anything about it. I pick up one of the photographs, holding it under the harsh light. The woman in the coffee shop photo has dark hair and is wearing a blue sweater. She's looking through the passenger window of what must be the photographer's car, and there's something in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or resignation. The timestamp in the corner says it was taken at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday. The documents in the box are even stranger. They're handwritten notes, all in the same careful script, describing the daily routines of various people. Tuesday. Subject A leaves for work at 7:45 a.m., takes Route 34 to the industrial district. Stops at the Shell station on Maple Street every morning for coffee and a newspaper. Always pays in cash. Always parks in the same spot. There are dozens of these notes covering different people over what appears to be several months. The level of detail is obsessive. What time they wake up, what they eat for breakfast, which route they take to work, who they talk to when they go to bed. It's like someone was studying these people, learning their patterns, preparing for something. I set the photos aside and pick up the digital recorder. It's an older model, the kind you might find at an office supply store. The battery is dead, but we had it checked by our tech guys when the case first came in. There are 47 audio files stored on it, each one labeled with a date and time. I listened to a few of them when Sarah first brought the box down. They're recordings of conversations, phone calls by the sound of it. But here's the disturbing part. Only one side of each conversation is audible. You can hear a man's voice, always calm and measured, responding to someone you can't hear. "Yes, I understand," he says in one recording. Tuesday at 7:30, the blue sweater. No, she won't be expecting it. In another, the timing has to be perfect. She takes the same route every day. The construction zone on Elm Street would be ideal. The voice is educated, middle-aged, speaking with the kind of casual confidence that comes from years of practice. There's no emotion in it, no urgency or excitement. He talks about these people like they're items on a grocery list, things to be checked off and disposed of. But what really gets to me is the background noise in these recordings. You can hear the sounds of normal life. Traffic, children playing, the distant hum of air conditioning. This man is conducting these conversations from ordinary places, surrounded by ordinary people who have no idea what's being discussed just a few feet away from them. He's hiding in plain sight, planning something terrible while the world goes about its business around him. I reach for the recorder, then hesitate. There's something about this case that's gotten under my skin more than most. Maybe it's the photographs, the way those people are looking at the camera like they know something terrible is about to happen. Maybe it's the clinical tone of those recorded conversations, the way the voice talks about human beings like they're chess pieces to be moved around a board. Or maybe it's the fact that we've never been able to identify a single person in those photographs, never been able to match the handwriting to anyone in our database, never been able to trace the source of any of this material. Sarah Chen started having nightmares about 3 weeks after she brought me the box. She mentioned it casually at first, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves that something isn't important. Had the strangest dream last night, she'd say, then describe seeing faces in her bedroom window, hearing footsteps in her hallway, feeling like someone was watching her even when she knew she was alone. I should have recognized the signs. I'd seen other detectives crack under the pressure of cases that got too personal, too close to home. But Sarah was different. She was methodical, logical, the kind of cop who followed procedures and trusted the system to work. The nightmares got worse. She started coming to work early, staying late, finding excuses to be in the building when she should have been home with her family. She'd wander down to the evidence room, ostensibly to check on other cases, but she always ended up standing in front of shelf 7C, staring at that plain brown box like it held the answers to questions she was afraid to ask. I'd find her there sometimes, just standing in the dim light, and when I'd ask if she needed anything, she'd shake her head and walk away without saying a word. The thing is, we ran the photographs through facial recognition software. We checked missing persons reports. We tried to match the handwriting in the notes to known offenders. Everything came back negative. As far as our system is concerned, the people in those photographs don't exist. The handwriting doesn't match anyone in our database. The voice on the recordings doesn't match any known criminals. It's like this evidence materialized from nowhere, created by someone who has no official existence. But here's what really bothers me about case 2019-0847. 3 weeks after the box was found, we started getting reports. Missing persons cases, all from the same general area where the storage unit was located. A woman named Rebecca Martinez, last seen leaving her job at a marketing firm. A man named David Park, who didn't show up for his shift at the auto parts store where he'd worked for 12 years. A teenage girl named Emma Rodriguez, who never made it home from school one afternoon. I've looked at their photos, the official ones from the missing persons reports. They're not the same people from the photographs in the box. But there's something about their faces, something in their expressions in those last known photos, that reminds me of the way those other people were looking at the camera. Like they knew something was coming. Like they'd accepted their fate even before it arrived. The storage unit where the box was found belonged to a company called Secure Storage Solutions. The rental agreement was paid for with cash, and the name on the contract, Michael Thompson, turned out to be fake. The address was a vacant lot, and the phone number was disconnected. The facility's security cameras had been vandalized 3 days before the box was discovered, so there's no footage of who might have accessed the unit. But here's something that keeps me awake at night. The storage unit wasn't just abandoned. According to the facility manager, someone had been paying the rent in cash every month for over a year. The payments would arrive in a plain manila envelope, slipped under the office door in the middle of the night. No return address, no note, just exact change for the monthly fee. The payments stopped exactly 1 week before the box was found, like whoever was responsible wanted us to find it, like they were ready to move on to the next phase of whatever they were planning. I closed the box and leaned back in my chair. The fluorescent light above me has stopped flickering, but now I can hear something else, a faint tapping sound, like fingers drumming on metal. It's probably just the heating system, but in this place, at this hour, every sound seems amplified and somehow significant. Sarah Chen transferred to another department 6 weeks after bringing me this box. Said she needed a change of scenery, wanted to work financial crimes instead of missing persons. But I think it was this case that got to her. She'd been a good detective, thorough and professional. But after that Tuesday morning when she brought me the box, she started looking over her shoulder more often, started asking questions about cases that weren't hers. The last time I saw her, she was cleaning out her desk, packing up 8 years of accumulated case files and personal belongings. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in weeks. "Frank," she said, stopping by my desk on her way out. "That box I brought you, case 2019-0847. I need you to promise me something." I looked up from my paperwork, surprised by the intensity in her voice. "Promise me you'll keep an eye on it. Don't let anyone else handle it without proper authorization. And if anything strange happens, I mean anything at all, you call me immediately." She handed me a card with her new contact information, her personal cell phone number, written in the same careful handwriting she used for case reports. "Sarah," I said, "what's this really about?" "What aren't? You telling me?" She glanced around the empty office, then leaned closer to my desk. "I think someone's been watching me," she whispered. "Following me home from work, sitting in cars outside my apartment. I know how that sounds, but I've been a cop for 8 years, Frank. I know when someone's conducting surveillance." She paused, looking back toward the evidence room. "I think it's connected to that box. I think whoever put it in that storage unit knows we found it, and they're not happy about it." I wanted to tell her she was being paranoid, that the stress of the job was getting to her, but something in her eyes stopped me. Sarah Chen was one of the most rational people I'd ever worked with. If she thought someone was watching her, I had to take it seriously. "Have you reported this to anyone upstairs?" I asked. She shook her head. "Who would believe me? I have no proof, no evidence. Just a feeling that I'm being watched by someone who may or may not exist." She straightened up, shouldering her bag. "Just promise me you'll be careful with that box, Frank. There's something about it that's not right. Something that goes deeper than just found property." That was 6 months ago. I haven't heard from Sarah since, despite calling her number several times. The calls go straight to voicemail and she never calls back. I've thought about driving to her new apartment, checking to make sure she's okay, but something holds me back. Maybe it's the memory of that last conversation, the way she kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to be standing there. Maybe it's the fact that I've started noticing things too. Cars that seem to follow the same route I take home from work. Phone calls that disconnect when I answer. The feeling that someone's been in my house while I was away, even though nothing appears to be missing. I stand up and walk to the small window near the back of the evidence room. It's positioned high on the wall, just below ground level, and during the day you can see people's feet walking past on the sidewalk outside. Now, it's just black glass reflecting the fluorescent lights back at me. The building is quiet except for the usual sounds, the hum of the heating system, the occasional creak of settling concrete, the distant rumble of traffic on the highway. But tonight, there's something else. Something that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Footsteps. Not the heavy boots of a security guard making rounds, but soft, deliberate steps somewhere above me. Someone is walking through the main floor of the building, moving slowly from room to room like they're searching for something. I check my watch. 12:15 a.m. The building should be empty except for me and the overnight dispatcher who stays in the communications center on the second floor. These footsteps are coming from the first floor, near the detective division. I turn away from the window and walk back to the shelving unit. The box sits on my cart, looking innocent enough in the harsh fluorescent light. But I know what's inside, and I know that somewhere out there, the person who created that collection of photographs and notes and recordings is still moving through the world, still watching, still planning. The footsteps above me have stopped, but I can feel a presence in the building, someone who shouldn't be here. I decide to investigate, leaving the evidence room and making my way up the stairs to the main floor. The hallway is dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows that seem to move as I walk. The detective division is at the end of the corridor, past the administrative offices and the briefing rooms. As I get closer, I can see that one of the office doors is slightly ajar. It's Sarah's old office, the one that's been empty since she transferred. I push the door open and step inside. The office is exactly as she left it. Empty desk, bare walls, a few forgotten paper clips scattered on the floor. But there's something wrong with the window. The blinds are open, and I can see scratches on the glass, like someone has been trying to peer inside. Fresh scratches, not the kind of wear you'd expect from years of use. I walk closer to examine them, and that's when I notice the envelope on the desk. It's a plain manila envelope, the kind you can buy at any office supply store. No return address, no postmark, just my name written in black ink across the front. The handwriting is careful and precise, the same script I've seen in the notes from case 2019-0847. My hands shake as I pick up the envelope and tear it open. Inside is a single photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photograph shows me standing in the evidence room, exactly where I was an hour ago. I'm holding one of the pictures from the box, studying it under the fluorescent light. The angle suggests it was taken from the small window near the back of the room, the one that looks out onto the sidewalk. Someone was standing outside the building, watching me through that window, taking pictures while I examined their evidence. The note is written in the same careful handwriting as the documents in the box. It says, "Mr. Morrison, I hope you're enjoying your review of case 2019-0847. I've been watching your progress with great interest. Sarah Chen was not as careful as she should have been, and I'm afraid her transfer to another department won't protect her from the consequences of her curiosity. I trust you'll be more discreet in your handling of my property. We'll be in touch soon." The paper slips from my fingers and floats to the floor. Someone has been watching me, following my movements, documenting my investigation of their evidence. They know about Sarah, about her transfer, about the fact that she was getting too close to something they wanted to keep hidden. And now they're warning me to back off, to leave their secrets alone. I pick up the note and read it again, looking for any clue about who might have written it. The language is formal, educated, but there's an underlying threat that makes my blood run cold. This isn't just someone playing games or trying to scare me. This is someone who has been planning something for a long time. Someone who sees people as obstacles to be removed when they become inconvenient. I think about Sarah, about the way she looked when she cleaned out her desk, the fear in her eyes when she talked about being watched. I think about the missing persons reports, the people who disappeared from the same area where the storage unit was found. And I think about the recordings on that digital device, the calm voice discussing timing and locations, and the best ways to approach unsuspecting victims. The footsteps in the hallway have returned, but now they're moving away from the detective division, heading toward the stairs that lead to the basement, toward the evidence room. I fold the note and slip it into my pocket, then make my way back down the corridor. The building feels different now, less like a safe haven and more like a trap. Every shadow could be hiding someone. Every sound could be the approach of danger. When I reach the evidence room, I find the door standing open. I know I closed it when I left, but now it's ajar, just wide enough for someone to slip inside. The fluorescent lights are still humming, casting their sickly glow across the rows of shelving. I step inside and immediately notice that something is wrong. The box from case 2019-0847 is no longer on my cart. It's been moved to the floor, opened, with its contents scattered across the concrete. The photographs are spread out in a circle, face up, like some kind of ritual arrangement. The documents are stacked neatly beside them, and the digital recorder is sitting in the center of it all, its red recording light blinking steadily. Someone has been here, in my evidence room, handling my cases, rearranging evidence according to their own twisted logic. I kneel down beside the scattered contents, careful not to disturb anything that might be considered a crime scene. The photographs look different now that they're arranged this way. What I originally thought were random pictures of strangers now seems more deliberate, more connected. The woman in the blue sweater, the man walking his dog, the teenage girl at the bus stop, they're all looking in the same direction, toward the same point beyond the camera's frame. It's like they're all seeing the same thing, all reacting to the same threat. I pick up the digital recorder and notice that it's been turned on. The display shows that it's currently recording, and the file counter indicates that 48 audio files are now stored on the device. Someone has added a new recording while I was upstairs. I hesitate for a moment, then press the playback button. The sound that emerges from the tiny speaker makes my blood run cold. It's the sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, and underneath it, I can hear the familiar hum of fluorescent lights. Someone was standing in this room, recording while I was upstairs investigating the empty office. They were here, among my evidence, while I was reading their note and examining their photograph. The recording continues for several minutes, just breathing, and the ambient sounds of the evidence room, until finally a voice speaks. "Hello, Mr. Morrison," the voice says. It's the same calm, measured tone I've heard in the other recordings, but this time it's addressing me directly. "I trust you found my message upstairs. I wanted to demonstrate how easily I can access your workplace, your evidence, your life. The security in this building is quite inadequate, don't you think? A simple matter of timing and observation." The voice pauses, and I can hear papers being shuffled, items being moved around. "I've been watching your work for quite some time now. Sarah Chen was merely the beginning. She stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to see, and her curiosity led her to places she shouldn't have gone. I tried to warn her, but she was too stubborn to listen. Now she's learning the consequences of her persistence." My hands are shaking as I hold the recorder. This isn't just a threat, it's a confession. This person is admitting to doing something to Sarah, to the missing persons from the area around the storage unit, to God knows how many other people over the years. And they're telling me that I'm next on their list if I don't back off. "You have a choice to make, Mr. Morrison," the voice continues. "You can follow Sarah's example and continue your investigation, in which case you'll share her fate. Or you can be smart, file your report with Internal Affairs, and forget this case ever existed. The evidence will disappear, the files will be lost, and you can go back to your quiet life in the basement, cataloging other people's nightmares. The recording ends with the sound of footsteps moving away from the microphone, then silence. I set the recorder down and look around the evidence room, suddenly aware of how isolated I am down here. How easy it would be for someone to trap me in this concrete tomb. The door could be locked from the outside, the phone lines could be cut, and no one would find me until morning, if they found me at all. I gather up the scattered photographs and documents, trying to restore some order to the chaos, but my hands won't stop shaking. Each picture seems to accuse me of failure, of not protecting the people who trusted the system to keep them safe. The careful handwriting in the notes mocks my inability to identify their author, to prevent whatever terrible things they've planned. And the digital recorder sits there like a time bomb, counting down to the moment when I'll have to decide whether to pursue this case or let it disappear into the bureaucratic void. The thing is, I've been doing this job for 31 years, and I've seen what happens when good people turn their backs on evil. I've cataloged the evidence from unsolved murders, from missing persons cases that went cold, from crimes that were forgotten because they were too difficult or too dangerous to investigate. I've watched families lose hope, watched justice slip away because someone decided it was easier to file a report and move on. But I've also seen what happens to cops who get too close to cases like this. They transfer to other departments. They take early retirement, they disappear into the night and are never heard from again. Sarah Chen was one of the good ones, and if this voice is telling the truth, she's already paying the price for her curiosity. How many others have made the same choice, only to find that some secrets are too dangerous to uncover? I look at the photographs again, at the faces of these ordinary people who were marked for death by someone who saw them as nothing more than subjects to be studied and eliminated. They deserved better than this. They deserved justice, protection, someone who would fight for them even when the fight seemed hopeless. But am I that person? Am I willing to risk everything to bring this monster to justice, knowing that it might cost me my life? The fluorescent lights above me flicker, and for a moment the room is plunged into darkness. In that brief instant, I imagine I can see shapes moving in the shadows, hear footsteps approaching from the corridor outside. When the lights stabilize, I'm alone again, but the feeling of being watched persists. Someone is out there, waiting to see what I'll do next, ready to add my name to their list of victims if I make the wrong choice. I put the evidence back in the box and return it to shelf 7C, but I know this isn't over. The person who left that recording expects an answer, and they won't wait forever. I can feel the weight of their attention pressing down on me, the knowledge that every decision I make from now on could be my last. The evidence room, which has been my sanctuary for 3 decades, now feels like a cage, and I'm the mouse waiting to see if the cat will pounce. I make my way back to my desk, but I can't concentrate on anything else. The note is still in my pocket, and I can feel it there like a physical weight, a reminder of the choice I have to make. I pull it out and read it again, looking for any detail I might have missed, any clue that might lead me to the person who wrote it. The handwriting is too generic, too practiced to reveal much about its author. It's the kind of script you might learn in a penmanship class, designed to be legible but anonymous. The phone on my desk rings, and I jump at the sound. It's after midnight, and I rarely get calls this late unless there's an emergency. I hesitate for a moment, then pick up the receiver. Evidence room, Morrison speaking. There's silence on the other end, then the sound of breathing, slow and deliberate. The same breathing I heard on the recording. "I trust you found my gift," the voice says. It's definitely the same person, speaking in that same calm, measured tone. I wanted to make sure you understood the seriousness of your situation. Sarah Chen thought she was clever, thought she could outsmart me. She was wrong. "What did you do to her?" I ask, trying to keep my voice steady. Where is she? Sarah is learning that curiosity can be dangerous, the voice replies. She's alive for now, but her situation is precarious. It could change at any moment depending on the choices that other people make. Your choices, Mr. Morrison. The line goes quiet for a moment, and I can hear what sounds like traffic in the background, the distant hum of a city at night. I'm calling from a payphone downtown, the voice continues, as if reading my thoughts. Old-fashioned but effective. No way to trace the call, no digital footprints to follow. I've learned to be careful over the years. What do you want from me? I ask. I want you to understand that this case is bigger than you realize. The evidence you've been examining, the photographs, the notes, the recordings, they're just the beginning. There are others, Mr. Morrison, many others. People who have been watching, studying, planning for years, and we don't appreciate interference. The use of the word "we" sends a chill down my spine. This isn't just one person acting alone. It's a network, a group of people who have been working together to do God knows what. The missing persons cases, the abandoned storage unit, the careful surveillance. It's all part of something much larger and more organized than I imagined. The storage unit was a test, the voice continues. We needed to see how the local police would react to certain types of evidence. Sarah Chen was more thorough than we expected, and you've been more persistent than we hoped. But every test has its limits, and you've reached yours. I can't just ignore this, I say. People are missing. People are dead. I took an oath to protect and serve, and that includes bringing criminals to justice. Noble words, the voice says, and I can hear the smile in it. But you're not a detective, Mr. Morrison. You're a custodian. Your job is to maintain the evidence, not to solve crimes, and if you continue to overstep your boundaries, you'll find yourself in the same situation as Detective Chen. The line goes dead, and I'm left staring at the phone in my hand. The silence in the evidence room feels oppressive now, like the walls are closing in around me. I know I should call someone. My supervisor, the FBI, anyone who might be able to help. But who would believe me? I have no proof that this phone call ever happened. No evidence that Sarah is in danger except for the word of someone who admits to being a criminal. I walk back to shelf 7C and look at the box containing case 2019-0847. Inside are the photographs of people who may already be dead, the notes describing their final days, the recordings of conversations planning their deaths. And now I have to decide whether to add my name to that list by continuing my investigation, or to let it all disappear into the bureaucratic maze of police procedure. The smart thing to do would be to file my report with Internal Affairs, recommend that the case be closed due to lack of evidence, and go back to my quiet life in the basement. I could retire in a few years, take my pension, and try to forget about the people whose faces stare out from those photographs. I could tell myself that I did my job, that I followed procedure, that what happened to them wasn't my responsibility. But I know I won't be able to forget. Those faces will haunt me for the rest of my life, and every time I read about another missing person or unsolved murder, I'll wonder if it's connected to this case. I'll wonder if I could have prevented it by being brave enough to pursue the truth, no matter where it led. The fluorescent lights above me are starting to flicker again, and I can hear that tapping sound in the distance. Fingers drumming on metal, or maybe footsteps on concrete. Someone is still in the building, still watching, still waiting to see what I'll do next. I think about Sarah, about the fear in her eyes when she talked about being followed, about the way she looked over her shoulder like she expected someone to be there. I think about the missing persons, Rebecca Martinez, David Park, Emma Rodriguez, and all the others who might be out there, waiting for someone to find them, to bring them home, to make their killers pay for what they've done. and I think about the network of people who have been watching and planning and killing for years, confident that no one will ever be brave enough or smart enough to stop them. The choice is mine, and I have to make it now. I can walk away from this case, file my report, and let the bureaucracy swallow it whole. Or I can dig deeper, follow the evidence wherever it leads, and hope that I'm strong enough to survive what I find. Either way, I know that after tonight nothing will ever be the same. I make my decision. I walk to the filing cabinet where I keep my personal copies of case files, the ones that don't officially exist, but help me keep track of patterns and connections that might otherwise be lost. I pull out a manila folder and begin copying the photographs, the notes, the transcripts of the recordings. If someone wants to make this evidence disappear, they'll have to work harder than just intimidating one tired custodian. As I work, I can hear movement in the building above me. Not the random sounds of settling concrete or heating systems, but deliberate footsteps, multiple people moving through the corridors with purpose. They're not trying to hide their presence anymore. They know I'm down here, and they're coming to finish what they started. I grab the copies and stuff them into my jacket, then turn off the lights in the evidence room. The corridor outside is dark except for the emergency lighting, and I can hear voices now, low and urgent, coming from the stairwell. I count at least 3 different speakers, all men, all discussing the best way to get to the basement without being seen by the security cameras. There's a service elevator at the far end of the corridor, one that's rarely used and connects to the parking garage. If I can reach it without being seen, I might be able to get out of the building and find help. But first, I need to make sure that Sarah's fate, whatever it is, doesn't remain a secret. I pull out my phone and send a text message to every contact I have in law enforcement, including the FBI field office in the state capital. The message is simple. Case 2019-0847. Evidence room. Send help. The voices in the stairwell are getting closer. I can hear them planning their approach, dividing up responsibilities, making sure that no one escapes. These aren't random criminals or opportunistic killers. They're organized, professional, and they've done this before. Sarah was right to be scared, and she was right to transfer to another department. But it wasn't enough to save her, and it won't be enough to save me unless I'm smarter than she was. I make my way toward the service elevator, staying close to the wall and moving as quietly as possible. The emergency lighting casts strange shadows, and every corner could be hiding someone waiting to grab me. Behind me, I can hear the stairwell door open, followed by the soft sound of multiple footsteps entering the basement corridor. The service elevator is still 50 feet away when I hear the first voice behind me. "He's not in the evidence room," someone says in a low whisper. "Check the other storage areas. He has to be down here somewhere." I press myself against the wall and try to become invisible, but I know it's only a matter of time before they find me. The corridor is long and narrow, with nowhere to hide and only one exit at each end. I reach the elevator and press the call button, praying that it won't make too much noise when it arrives. The mechanical sounds seem impossibly loud in the quiet basement, and I'm sure that everyone in the building can hear them. The footsteps behind me have stopped, and I know they've heard it too. They're coming toward me now, moving faster, no longer concerned about stealth. The elevator doors open just as I see the first flashlight beam sweep around the corner behind me. I step inside and frantically press the button for the parking garage, but the doors seem to take forever to close. In those eternal seconds, I can see 3 figures running down the corridor toward me, their faces hidden in shadow, but their intent unmistakable. The doors finally slide shut, and I feel the elevator begin to move. but I know this reprieve is temporary. They'll be waiting for me when I reach the garage, or they'll find another way to cut off my escape. The copies of the evidence are still in my jacket, and I realize that they represent the only hope of exposing this network of killers. If something happens to me, these documents need to survive. The elevator reaches the parking garage, and the doors open to reveal an empty concrete space filled with police vehicles. My own car is parked near the far wall, but I can see movement in the shadows between the parked cars. They're already here, positioned to intercept me no matter which direction I choose. I step out of the elevator and immediately hear footsteps echoing from multiple directions. "Mr. Morrison," a voice calls out from somewhere in the darkness. It's the same calm tone I've heard on the recordings, but now there's an edge to it. A note of impatience. This doesn't have to be difficult. We just need to talk, to explain the situation more clearly. Come out where we can see you, and no one will get hurt. I duck behind a patrol car and try to think. My own vehicle is too far away, and they've obviously anticipated that I would try to reach it. The garage has 2 exits, one that leads to the street, and another that connects to the building's main lobby. Both are probably being watched, but there's a third option, one that they might not have considered. The garage connects to the old tunnel system that was built when the building was constructed in the 1960s. The tunnels were designed to provide secure access between the police station and the courthouse next door, but they've been abandoned for years. Most people have forgotten they exist, but I've had to store evidence down there occasionally when the main room was full. I make my way toward the maintenance area at the back of the garage, staying low and using the parked cars for cover. Behind me, I can hear them coordinating their search, calling out positions and areas that have been cleared. They're thorough and methodical, but they're also focused on the obvious escape routes. The tunnel entrance is hidden behind a utility door that most people assume leads to a janitor's closet. I reach the door and try the handle. It's unlocked, just as I hoped. The tunnel beyond is pitch black and smells of stagnant water and decay, but it represents my only chance of escape. I step inside and close the door behind me, then use my phone's flashlight to navigate the narrow passage. The tunnel is longer than I remembered, and in worse condition. Water drips from the ceiling, and I can hear the scurrying of rats in the darkness ahead. But behind me, the sound of voices is getting fainter. They haven't found the tunnel entrance yet, but it's only a matter of time. I need to move faster. Halfway through the tunnel, my phone buzzes with a text message. For a moment, I think it might be a response to my earlier plea for help, but when I look at the screen, I see that it's from Sarah's number. The message is simple. "Frank, they have me. Don't trust anyone. The network goes higher than you think. Check storage unit 247 at Riverside Self-Storage. Evidence is hidden there. Tell no one until you know who to trust." My hands are shaking as I read the message. Sarah is alive, but she's obviously in immediate danger. The fact that she's been able to send this text suggests that she's found a way to communicate without her captors knowing. But it also means that time is running out. If there's evidence hidden in another storage unit, it might be the key to exposing this entire conspiracy. I reach the end of the tunnel and find myself in the basement of the courthouse. The building is closed for the night, but the security here is minimal compared to the police station. I make my way to the parking lot and realize that I need transportation. My car is back at the police station, surrounded by people who want to kill me. But I remember seeing Sarah's car in the courthouse parking lot earlier this week. She had court testimony scheduled and left it here overnight when she got a ride back to the station with another detective. If she still has it parked here, and if I can find her keys, I might have a way to reach the storage facility. I find her car in the far corner of the lot, an older sedan that blends in with the other civilian vehicles. Sarah always kept a spare key in a magnetic box attached to the frame. A habit that other cops had teased her about, but one that might save my life tonight. I feel around under the car until I find the small metal container, and sure enough, the key is inside. As I start the engine, I realize that I'm crossing a line that I can never uncross. By taking this car, by pursuing this investigation, I'm committing myself to a path that will either expose a network of killers or get me killed in the process. There's no going back to my quiet life in the evidence room, no returning to the safety of bureaucratic routine. The storage facility is across town, in an industrial area where the security is minimal, and the surveillance cameras are either broken or fake. It's the perfect place to hide evidence that could bring down powerful people, the kind of place where secrets go to die. As I drive through the empty streets, I keep checking my mirrors for signs of pursuit, but the roads are empty except for the occasional late-night commuter. Riverside Self-Storage is a sprawling complex of concrete buildings and metal doors, surrounded by a chain-link fence that's more for show than security. Unit 247 is in the back corner, away from the main office and the few working streetlights. I park Sarah's car near the entrance and walk through the maze of storage units, using my phone's flashlight to read the numbers stenciled on each door. When I find Unit 247, I discover that the lock has been cut recently. The metal door slides up easily, revealing a space that's much larger than the unit where the original evidence was found. This one is filled with boxes, filing cabinets, and electronic equipment that looks like it belongs in a surveillance center rather than a storage facility. I step inside and begin examining the contents. The boxes are filled with photographs, thousands of them, showing people in what appear to be their final moments. Unlike the clinical surveillance photos in case 2019-0847, these images capture the actual murders. Victims bound and terrified, killers whose faces are carefully obscured, crime scenes that have never been reported to police. The filing cabinets contain detailed records of what can only be described as a murder-for-hire operation. Names, addresses, payment schedules, and method preferences are all meticulously documented. But what makes my blood run cold is the client list. These aren't random criminals hiring killers. They're businessmen, politicians, law enforcement officials, people with the power to make problems disappear and investigations go away. I find a section labeled Law Enforcement Assets and discover files on dozens of police officers, detectives, and federal agents who have been compromised, blackmailed, or eliminated. Sarah's file is there, along with detailed surveillance records covering the past 6 months. They knew about her investigation from the beginning, and they let her get close enough to the truth to identify her as a threat. My own file is thicker than I expected. They've been watching me for years, documenting my routines, my relationships, my weaknesses. There are photographs of me leaving work, shopping for groceries, eating dinner alone in my small apartment. They know everything about my life, and they've been planning for this moment longer than I realized. But the most disturbing discovery is a computer terminal that's still powered on, connected to what appears to be a secure network. The screen shows a map of the city with dozens of red dots scattered across it. Each dot represents an active target, and when I click on one, it brings up a detailed file on someone who's been marked for elimination. The files include real-time location data, suggesting that these people are being tracked through their phones, their credit cards, their digital footprints. I search for Sarah's name and find her file still active. According to the tracking data, she's being held in a warehouse on the outskirts of town, less than 10 miles from where I'm standing. The file indicates that her termination is scheduled for dawn, just a few hours from now. If I'm going to save her, I need to move quickly. But as I prepare to leave the storage unit, I realize that this discovery is bigger than just saving Sarah or exposing a few killers. This network has been operating for years, eliminating anyone who gets too close to the truth, corrupting the very people who are supposed to protect society from criminals like themselves. The evidence in this storage unit could bring down dozens of powerful people, but only if it reaches the right hands. I start copying files onto a flash drive I found in one of the boxes, but I know that time is running out. Dawn is less than 3 hours away, and if I don't reach Sarah before then, she'll become another unsolved disappearance, another case file that gets lost in the bureaucratic maze. The weight of all these secrets, all these lives that have been lost or destroyed, settles on my shoulders like a physical burden. As I work, I can hear vehicles approaching the storage facility. They've found me again, probably by tracking Sarah's car or monitoring the security cameras I thought were fake. I have to make a choice. Try to save Sarah and risk losing all the evidence, or protect the evidence and let Sarah die. Both options feel like failure, but I know that Sarah would want me to expose the network, even if it costs her life. I pocket the flash drive and grab as many files as I can carry, then slip out the back of the storage unit just as the first vehicles pull into the parking lot. The industrial area behind the facility is a maze of warehouses and abandoned buildings, perfect for hiding, but also perfect for getting lost. In the distance, I can see the glow of the warehouse where Sarah is being held, and I know that whatever happens next will determine not just my fate, but the fate of everyone who has ever trusted the system to protect them from the monsters that hide in plain sight. The weight of evidence has never felt heavier than it does right now, as I make my way through the darkness toward a confrontation that will either expose the truth or bury it forever. Behind me, I can hear voices calling my name, but I don't look back. Some secrets are too important to die with, and some fights are too important to lose no matter what the cost. The call came in at 2:47 a.m., jolting me awake from the kind of sleep that never really comes easy anymore. 26 years working homicide, and I still can't get used to the phone ringing in the middle of the night. Detective Maria Santos here, Pittsburgh PD. The voice on the other end was Sergeant Williams from the night shift, and he sounded rattled in a way that immediately put me on edge. Santos, we need you down at the Riverside Industrial Complex. We've got a situation that's, well, it's connected to something you worked on about 15 years ago, the Kellerman case. My blood went cold at the mention of that name. James Kellerman had been one of my first major cases as a detective. A serial killer who murdered 7 women before disappearing without a trace in 2009. We never found his body, never got closure for the families, and the case had haunted me ever since. I threw on my clothes and drove through the empty streets, my mind racing back to those dark months when Kellerman had terrorized the city. He had a pattern: young women, always taken from parking garages late at night, always found 3 days later in abandoned buildings with the same ritualistic positioning. Then suddenly, nothing. No more bodies, no more leads, just silence that stretched on for years until everyone assumed he was dead or had moved on to hunting grounds in another state. The industrial complex was buzzing with activity despite the early hour. Patrol cars, crime scene techs, the coroner's van, all the familiar chaos that surrounds a major discovery. I found Williams standing outside a warehouse that had been abandoned since the steel industry collapsed in this part of town. His face was pale, and he kept glancing back at the building like he expected something to come crawling out of it. "What do we have?" I asked, pulling out my notebook and trying to shift into professional mode, despite the sick feeling growing in my stomach. Williams handed me a pair of latex gloves and a flashlight. Construction crew was supposed to start demolition this morning. When they did their final sweep yesterday, they found a hidden room in the basement. Maria, you need to see this for yourself. I can't even begin to describe what's down there. We made our way through the warehouse, past rusted machinery and debris left behind when the company went bankrupt. The basement stairs were narrow and steep, leading down into darkness that seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight. At the bottom, crime scene tape blocked off a section of wall where someone had broken through what appeared to be a false partition. Beyond it, I could see lights set up by the forensics team and hear the low murmur of voices. The hidden room was about 12 feet square, with concrete walls and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. But it was what covered those walls that made my knees go weak. Photographs, hundreds of them, arranged in careful rows from floor to ceiling. And not just photographs, newspaper clippings, police reports, evidence photos that should never have left the station. All of it documenting the Kellerman murders in obsessive detail. But that wasn't the worst part. Mixed in with the photos of Kellerman's victims were images of other women. Women I didn't recognize, but who showed the same signs of torture and ritualistic positioning. The dates written on the backs of these photos went back years before Kellerman's first known murder, and continued well past his disappearance. Either James Kellerman had been active much longer than we realized, or someone else had been copying his methods with terrifying accuracy. Detective Ray Murphy, my partner for the past 8 years, was standing in the center of the room with a grim expression. Maria, thank God you're here. This place is like a shrine to the Kellerman murders, but there's more. Look at this. He led me to a metal desk in the corner where several items were laid out in evidence bags. Driver's licenses, jewelry, personal effects that I recognized from the original case files. Items that had never been found at the crime scenes or in Kellerman's apartment when we searched it. These are trophies, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Kellerman kept trophies from his victims, but we never found them. How did they end up here? Murphy shook his head. That's not even the strangest part. Look at the dates on some of these IDs. He pointed to a driver's license in one of the evidence bags. The photo showed a young woman with dark hair and a nervous smile, and the issue date was from 2019, 10 years after Kellerman had vanished. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Either James Kellerman was still alive and had been killing for 15 years without detection, or someone had been continuing his work. Someone who had access to evidence from the original crime scenes. Someone who knew details about the murders that had never been released to the public. Someone who might have been watching our investigation from the very beginning. I walked along the wall, studying the photographs and documents more carefully. The organization was meticulous, almost scientific in its precision. Each victim had their own section, with photos documenting different stages of what appeared to be extended captivity. The women weren't just murdered, they were studied, documented, treated like specimens in some twisted experiment. And at the center of it all, enlarged and framed like a portrait, was a photograph of James Kellerman himself. But this wasn't a mugshot or a surveillance photo. This was a formal portrait, the kind you might see in a corporate directory or a university faculty page. Kellerman was older than in the photos I remembered, his hair gray and his face lined with age, but his eyes held the same cold intelligence that had chilled me during our interrogations. This photo had been taken recently, within the last few years based on his appearance. Murphy, I called out, pointing to the portrait. James Kellerman didn't disappear in 2009. He's been here all along, and someone's been helping him. My partner joined me in front of the photograph, and I could see the same sick realization dawning on his face. This isn't just a hiding place, I continued. It's a command center. Someone's been coordinating these murders, documenting them, maybe even commissioning them. The crime scene photographer was systematically documenting every inch of the room, but I knew that photos would never capture the full horror of what we'd found. This wasn't just evidence of serial murder. It was evidence of a conspiracy that had been operating under our noses for over a decade. Someone with access to police files. Someone who knew how investigations worked. Someone who could make evidence disappear and witnesses stay silent. As I continued to examine the walls, I noticed something that made my blood run even colder. Mixed in with the crime scene photos were images that I recognized as internal police documentation. Photos from our evidence room, copies of interview transcripts, even surveillance footage from inside the station. Someone had been watching us, documenting our investigation, staying one step ahead of law enforcement for 15 years. The realization that we might have a compromised officer, or worse, a network of corrupt cops working with Kellerman, was almost too much to process. How many cases had been sabotaged? How many killers had walked free because someone on the inside was protecting them? And how many victims had died because we couldn't see the corruption growing within our own ranks? Murphy was examining a filing cabinet in the corner of the room when he called out with urgency in his voice. "Maria, you need to see this. There's a whole section of files here labeled Active Projects." He pulled out a manila folder and opened it on the desk. Inside were surveillance photos of women around the city, all taken within the last few weeks. Young women going about their daily lives, completely unaware that they were being stalked by a predator. Each photo was accompanied by detailed notes about the subject's routine, where they worked, what time they left home, which routes they took to and from their destinations. The handwriting was neat and methodical, the same careful script I'd seen in Kellerman's original journals. But there were also typed reports, printed emails, and what appeared to be official police surveillance summaries. Multiple people were involved in gathering this intelligence. "Look at this," Murphy said, pointing to a photo of a young woman leaving what appeared to be a coffee shop. Jennifer Walsh, 24, works at the downtown branch of First National Bank. Lives alone in the Shadyside apartment complex on Maple Street. No boyfriend, limited social connections. The level of detail was terrifying, suggesting weeks or months of observation. At the bottom of the page, someone had written, "Ready for acquisition" in red ink. I felt sick as I flipped through more files. There were at least a dozen women being actively stalked, their lives reduced to data points and vulnerabilities. But what made it worse was the realization that some of these surveillance photos had been taken from angles that suggested the photographer had police access. Parking lots, building security footage, even what looked like DMV photos. This wasn't just one killer working alone. This was an organized operation with resources and official backing. "Murphy, we need to get these photos to missing persons immediately. If these women are targets, they need protection." But even as I said it, I realized the problem we faced. If there were corrupt officers involved in this conspiracy, alerting the wrong people could put these women in even greater danger. We needed to be careful about who we trusted with this information. The filing cabinet contained more than just target files. There were financial records showing payments to various individuals, some with badge numbers that corresponded to officers in our department. Names I recognized, cops I'd worked with for years, all apparently receiving regular payments from an account tied to a shell corporation. The amounts were significant. Thousands of dollars per month. Enough to buy silence and cooperation from people who were supposed to be protecting the public. "Jesus Christ," Murphy whispered, holding up a payment ledger. "Look at these names. Rodriguez from Vice, Thompson from Robbery, even Captain Hayes from Downtown. Maria, this goes all the way to the top. They've been paying off cops across multiple divisions for years." The scope of the corruption was staggering. No wonder Kellerman had been able to operate for so long without being caught. He had eyes and ears throughout the department. People who could warn him about investigations, misplace evidence, or redirect resources away from getting too close to the truth. But the most disturbing discovery was a section labeled Insurance Policies. These files contained compromising information about various law enforcement officials, photos of affairs, evidence of minor crimes, documentation of policy violations that could end careers. It was a blackmail operation designed to ensure loyalty and silence from anyone who might be tempted to expose the conspiracy. I found my own file in this section, and my hand shook as I opened it. Inside were photos of me taken outside my apartment, copies of my financial records, and detailed notes about my personal relationships. They knew about my divorce, my struggles with alcohol after particularly difficult cases, even my visits to the department psychologist. The file noted that I was highly motivated by justice and potentially problematic if she discovers the truth. "They've been watching all of us," I said, showing Murphy his own file. "Anyone who might pose a threat to their operation. They know our weaknesses, our pressure points, everything they'd need to control or eliminate us if necessary." The paranoia was starting to set in. How long had we been under surveillance? Had our investigation into this room been anticipated? Were we walking into a trap right now? Murphy was studying what appeared to be a communication log, pages of coded messages and responses. "Maria, look at this. They have a whole system for coordinating activities, times, locations, code names for different operations. And some of these dates correspond with unsolved murders from the past 5 years. He ran his finger down a list of entries. February 15th, package delivered to Warehouse 7. That's the same date Rebecca Chen went missing from South Side. The realization hit us both at the same time. This wasn't just about James Kellerman and his original murder spree. This was an ongoing criminal enterprise that had been using his methods to eliminate targets for paying customers. Murder for hire, disguised as the work of a serial killer who was supposed to be dead or disappeared. It was brilliant in its simplicity and horrifying in its effectiveness. I walked back to the wall of photographs, looking at them with new understanding. The women weren't random victims chosen by a deranged killer. They were specific targets, eliminated for reasons that had nothing to do with Kellerman's original psychological profile. Some might have been witnesses to other crimes, others might have possessed information that threatened powerful people, and still others might have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. "We need to get out of here," I said suddenly, the feeling of being watched becoming overwhelming. "If they know we're here, if they've been monitoring our communications, then we're in immediate danger. We need to find a secure location and figure out who we can trust." But even as I said it, I realized that our options were limited. With corruption reaching into the highest levels of the department, there might be nowhere safe to turn. Murphy was photographing documents with his personal phone, trying to preserve evidence before it could disappear. "Maria, we need backup, but we can't use official channels. Maybe the FBI, state police, someone outside the local department who might not be compromised." The problem was that we had no way of knowing how far this conspiracy extended. If it included federal agents or state officials, we could be making the situation worse by involving them. As we prepared to leave the hidden room, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. On the desk, partially hidden under other papers, was a recent surveillance photo of Murphy and me entering the warehouse. It was time-stamped less than 2 hours ago, meaning that someone had been watching us from the moment we arrived at the scene. They knew we were here. They knew what we'd discovered. and they were probably already planning their response. "Murphy?" I said, pointing to the photo. "We're not just investigating this conspiracy. We're the next targets." The weight of that realization settled over us like a heavy blanket. Everything we'd learned in this room, all the evidence of corruption and murder, meant nothing if we didn't survive long enough to expose it. And with enemies embedded throughout law enforcement, our chances of survival were looking increasingly slim. The sound of footsteps above us made us both freeze. Someone was in the warehouse, moving around with purpose, not trying to hide their presence. Either it was law enforcement responding to our call for additional support, or it was the people responsible for this horror show coming to clean up loose ends. Given what we'd discovered about corruption in the department, I wasn't optimistic about which option it was. "Turn off your radio," I whispered to Murphy, gesturing for him to follow me toward the back of the hidden room. If those footsteps belonged to compromised officers, they'd be monitoring our communications, waiting for us to call for backup that would never come. The room had seemed like a tomb when we first entered it, but now it felt like an actual trap, with only one way in or out and dozens of people who wanted us dead. The footsteps above were moving systematically through the warehouse, the heavy boots of multiple people conducting a thorough search. I could hear low voices, coordinated movements, the kind of tactical approach that suggested these weren't random criminals but trained professionals. Either fellow officers or military personnel, people who knew how to clear a building and eliminate targets efficiently. Murphy was still photographing documents, working frantically to preserve evidence even as our situation became increasingly desperate. "Maria, if we don't make it out of here, this information needs to survive. I'm uploading everything to a secure cloud server, but we need time to finish the transfer." The upload progress bar on his phone showed only 60% complete, and the footsteps above were getting closer to the basement stairs. I examined the walls of the room more carefully, looking for any other exit or hiding place. The concrete was solid. The false partition we'd entered through was the only break in the structure. But in the corner behind the filing cabinet, I noticed what appeared to be a ventilation grate near floor level. It was small, probably too small for an adult to crawl through, but it might be large enough to hide evidence or establish communication with the outside world. "There," I pointed to the grate. "If they find us, maybe we can get word out through there. Do you have signal down here?" Murphy checked his phone and shook his head. "Nothing. The concrete walls are blocking everything. We're completely cut off." The isolation was working against us. Even if we managed to call for help, there was no guarantee that help would come from people we could trust. The voices above were getting clearer, and I could make out fragments of conversation. "Basement level, check all storage areas. They found the room, so they know everything. No witnesses." The casual way they discussed eliminating us confirmed my worst fears. These weren't rogue officers acting on their own. This was a coordinated operation with clear orders and professional execution. I pulled Murphy behind the filing cabinet, positioning ourselves so we couldn't be seen from the entrance but could still monitor the upload progress on his phone. 75% complete. We needed just a few more minutes, but time was running out fast. The footsteps were on the basement stairs now, multiple people descending with tactical precision. "Detective Santos, Detective Murphy," a voice called out from the bottom of the stairs. "We know you're down here. Come out with your hands visible and no one gets hurt. We just need to talk." I recognized the voice. Sergeant Rodriguez from the Vice Division, one of the names we'd seen on the payment ledgers. The betrayal cut deep, knowing that someone I'd worked with for years was involved in this conspiracy. Murphy's phone showed 90% upload complete. Almost there, I made a decision that could save lives or get us both killed. "Rodriguez," I called back. "We're here. We're coming out." I gestured for Murphy to stay hidden and continue the upload while I stepped into view of the basement entrance. If I could buy us a few more seconds, the evidence might survive even if we didn't. "Maria, good to see you," Rodriguez said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Behind him were 3 other officers I didn't recognize, all wearing tactical gear and carrying weapons. "We got your call about discovering evidence related to the Kellerman case. Command sent us to secure the scene and escort you both back to the station for debriefing." "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Murphy's just finishing up documenting the evidence. He'll be right out." I could see the suspicion in Rodriguez's eyes, the way his hand rested casually on his sidearm. He knew we'd found more than just Kellerman evidence, and he was trying to determine how much we'd learned before deciding how to proceed. "Actually, Maria, there's been a change in protocol. Command wants all evidence secured immediately, and they want both of you to come with us right now. No delays, no exceptions." The false friendliness was dropping away, replaced by barely concealed threat. Behind me, I could hear Murphy's phone buzz softly. The upload was complete. "Sure thing," I said, stepping aside to reveal Murphy emerging from behind the filing cabinet with his hands visible. "We were just making sure everything was properly documented before we left." Rodriguez nodded, but his eyes were scanning the room, looking for signs of what we might have discovered or removed. Good. Professional as always. "Now, we need to ask you both to surrender your weapons and phones. Standard procedure when evidence of this magnitude is involved. Can't have any potential contamination of the crime scene." It wasn't standard procedure at all, and we all knew it. This was the moment when the pretense would drop entirely. Murphy looked at me, and I gave him an almost imperceptible nod. The evidence was safe, uploaded to a server that Rodriguez and his people couldn't access. Whatever happened to us now, the truth about this conspiracy would survive. "Of course," Murphy said, slowly reaching for his service weapon. "Just following protocol." But instead of surrendering his gun, Murphy suddenly dove to the side and drew his weapon, shouting, "Gun!" as Rodriguez's team reached for their firearms. The basement exploded into chaos as everyone scrambled for cover and tactical advantage. I rolled behind the desk as bullets started flying, the concrete walls echoing with the sound of gunfire and shouted orders. "Basement level, shots fired, officers down." I could hear Rodriguez screaming into his radio, but I knew he wasn't calling for legitimate backup. He was summoning more corrupt officers, more people who were part of this conspiracy. We might have won the first engagement, but reinforcements would be arriving soon. Murphy had taken cover behind the filing cabinet and was returning fire at the tactical team. "Maria, we need to move. This position is compromised." But there was nowhere to go. The basement was a dead end, and the only exit led directly through Rodriguez and his people. We were trapped in a room full of evidence documenting our own department's corruption, fighting for our lives against fellow officers who had sold their souls for money. I checked my ammunition, full magazine plus 1 spare. Not enough for a prolonged firefight, especially against trained tactical operators. But maybe we didn't need to win this engagement. Maybe we just needed to survive long enough for the right people to discover what we'd uploaded. "Murphy," I called out during a brief lull in the shooting. "How long before your dead man's switch activates?" 6 hours, he replied, understanding immediately what I was asking. Before coming down here, Murphy had set up an automated system that would send all our evidence to multiple recipients if he didn't check in by a specific time. FBI, state police, internal affairs, and several journalists who specialized in police corruption. If we died tonight, the truth would still come out. Then, we just need to stay alive for 6 hours, I said, though I knew the odds were against us. Rodriguez and his team had superior numbers, better equipment, and backup on the way. But they also had something to lose. Exposure of their conspiracy would mean life in prison for all of them. They couldn't afford to let us escape, but they also couldn't afford to create a massacre that would draw too much attention. The gunfire had stopped, replaced by tense silence as both sides assessed their positions. I could hear Rodriguez talking quietly on his radio, probably coordinating with incoming reinforcements or receiving new orders from whoever was running this operation. The fact that they hadn't just overwhelmed us with superior firepower suggested they were trying to minimize evidence of what had happened here. "Santos, Murphy," Rodriguez called out. "You're only making this harder on yourselves. Come out now and we can work something out. No one else has to get hurt." But I knew that any deal they offered would end with our deaths. We'd seen too much, learned too much, documented too much evidence of their crimes. The only reason we were still alive was that they needed to know what we'd done with the information before they killed us. "What's the offer, Rodriguez?" I called back, stalling for time. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to Murphy's dead man's switch activating. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're all accessories to multiple murders. Hard to see how we work that out. "Maria, you don't understand the full situation," Rodriguez replied, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard from him before, cold, calculating, almost clinical. James Kellerman was just the beginning. What we discovered in this room, what you think is evidence of corruption, it's actually something much larger, much more important, national security level stuff that's way above your pay grade. I exchanged glances with Murphy, who was reloading his weapon behind the filing cabinet. The attempt to reframe their murder conspiracy as some kind of patriotic operation was insulting to our intelligence, but it also revealed something about their mindset. These weren't officers who had gradually become corrupt. These were people who believed they were serving a higher purpose, which made them infinitely more dangerous. "National security?" I called back. "Is that what you tell yourselves when you torture and murder innocent women? That you're protecting America?" The anger in my voice was real. I'd spent my entire career fighting for justice, protecting victims, seeking truth. To hear fellow officers justify murder in the name of patriotism made me sick to my stomach. "You don't know what those women were involved in," Rodriguez continued. "Industrial espionage, foreign intelligence networks, terrorist financing. They weren't innocent victims, Maria. They were threats to national security that had to be eliminated through unofficial channels. Kellerman provided the perfect cover. Deaths that looked like the work of a known serial killer, rather than targeted assassinations. The pieces were starting to come together in a way that made the situation even more terrifying. This wasn't just local corruption or even a murder-for-hire operation. This was some kind of off-the-books intelligence operation, using local law enforcement as cover for extrajudicial killings. People connected to foreign governments, corporate espionage, or terrorist organizations were being eliminated by a shadow network that operated outside any legal oversight. "And what about the officers on your payroll?" Murphy called out. "Are they all part of this national security operation, or are they just criminals who got bought off?" The silence that followed suggested he'd hit a nerve. Not everyone involved in this conspiracy was a true believer. Some were just corrupt cops who had been recruited or blackmailed into providing support services. "The operation requires certain accommodations from local law enforcement," Rodriguez admitted. "Access to evidence rooms, crime scene manipulation, witness intimidation. Not everyone needs to know the full scope of what we're doing. just their specific role in supporting it. The payments ensure cooperation and silence. I could hear vehicles arriving outside the warehouse, engines shutting off, car doors slamming. Rodriguez's backup was here, which meant our window for escape was closing rapidly. But I was also starting to understand why they hadn't just killed us immediately. If this was really a national security operation, there would be protocols for dealing with compromised local law enforcement. They might try to recruit us rather than eliminate us. Maria, Ray, Rodriguez continued, you're both good cops with solid records. You could be assets to this operation instead of obstacles. Think about what you could accomplish with unlimited resources. No bureaucratic restrictions, the ability to actually make a difference in protecting this country from its enemies. The recruitment pitch was exactly what I'd expected, but it also revealed their desperation. They couldn't afford to kill 2 detectives without a very good explanation, especially after we'd been investigating the Kellerman case. Too many people knew we were here. Too many questions would be asked. They needed us to either join their conspiracy or disappear in a way that wouldn't raise suspicions. What's the alternative? I asked, though I already knew the answer. If we don't join your little shadow organization, what happens to us? The silence stretched out for several seconds before Rodriguez responded, and when he did, all pretense of friendliness was gone from his voice. Then you become a national security threat that needs to be eliminated, he said flatly. Your deaths will be tragic but explainable. 2 detectives killed in the line of duty while investigating a serial killer's hideout. Shot by unknown suspects who escaped in the confusion. Your families will get full benefits. Your names will be added to the memorial wall, and your investigation will disappear into classified files. Murphy's phone buzzed softly. A text message had come through, probably because we were close enough to the surface to get intermittent signal. He showed me the screen. Upload confirmed. Files distributed to all recipients. Dead man's switch armed. Even if they killed us now, the evidence would still be released. But that knowledge was cold comfort when facing immediate death. You have 60 seconds to decide, Rodriguez announced. Join the operation and help protect America from its enemies, or die as threats to national security. Either way, this conversation ends in 1 minute. I could hear movement outside the room, people taking positions, preparing for a final assault if we refused their offer. I looked around the hidden room one last time, at all the evidence of murder and corruption, at the photographs of victims who had died not because they were threats to national security, but because they had been inconvenient to powerful people. Whatever this operation really was, it had nothing to do with protecting America and everything to do with protecting the interests of those in power. Rodriguez, I called out, making my decision. Here's my counteroffer. You and your people surrender right now, and maybe we can work out a deal where you spend the rest of your lives in federal prison instead of getting the death penalty for treason. The response was immediate. A hail of gunfire that shattered the silence and sent concrete chips flying from the walls around us. Move! I shouted to Murphy, and we both rolled in different directions as the tactical team stormed into the room. The advantage of knowing the layout worked in our favor. They had to navigate around furniture and equipment while we could find cover and return fire from concealed positions. But our ammunition was limited, and they had overwhelming numbers. Murphy had taken position behind a metal shelving unit and was laying down covering fire, while I tried to reach a more defensible position near the back wall. Maria, they're using non-lethal rounds, he called out during a brief pause in the shooting. They want us alive. That knowledge changed the tactical situation significantly. If they needed us alive for interrogation or recruitment, we might be able to use that against them. I aimed for center mass on the nearest tactical officer and pulled the trigger, but instead of dropping, he stumbled and kept coming. Body armor and possibly additional protection beyond what normal police wore. These weren't just corrupt cops. They were trained operatives with military-grade equipment and tactics. We were outgunned and outmanned, fighting a losing battle against people who had every advantage. "Last chance," Rodriguez shouted over the gunfire. "Surrender now, or we start using lethal rounds." But I knew he was bluffing. They needed us alive to find out what we'd done with the evidence, who we'd contacted, what other loose ends needed to be tied up. As long as they had questions that needed answers, we had leverage. "Go to hell," Murphy responded, emphasizing his point with another burst of gunfire. The tactical team was advancing methodically, using overwhelming firepower to pin us down while they moved closer. Professional military tactics that suggested these people had training far beyond what any police department provided. We were fighting soldiers, not cops. The end came suddenly. A canister rolled across the floor between Murphy and me, and I had just enough time to recognize it as tear gas before the room filled with thick, choking smoke. My eyes were streaming, my lungs burning, and I could barely see the muzzle flashes as the tactical team moved in for final capture. Through the haze, I saw Murphy go down under a pile of black-clad figures, his weapon clattering across the concrete floor. I tried to retreat toward the back wall, but there was nowhere to go. Strong hands grabbed me from behind, zip-tying my wrists before I could resist. "Detective Maria Santos," a voice said close to my ear. "You're under arrest for obstruction of a federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly advise you to exercise that right." They dragged us out of the hidden room and up the basement stairs, past crime scene techs who were already working to sanitize the area. I recognized some of the faces, officers I'd worked with for years, people I'd trusted with my life, all of them part of this conspiracy. The betrayal was almost as painful as the zip ties cutting into my wrists. In the main warehouse space, they had set up what looked like a mobile command center. Banks of computer equipment, communication gear, and surveillance monitors showing feeds from cameras I hadn't even noticed around the industrial complex. This wasn't a hastily organized response to our discovery. This was a permanent operation that had been running for years. A man in an expensive suit was standing near the command center, studying reports and giving quiet orders to subordinates. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, probably federal law enforcement or intelligence services. When he saw us being brought up from the basement, he walked over with the measured pace of someone who had all the time in the world. "Detective Santos, Detective Murphy," he said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Special Agent Richardson, FBI. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances of our meeting, but your investigation has stumbled into an ongoing federal operation of considerable sensitivity." The FBI credentials he showed looked legitimate, but after everything we'd discovered, I wasn't inclined to trust anyone's badge or identification. "Federal operation," I said, my voice hoarse from the tear gas. "Is that what you call murder and corruption? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like organized crime with law enforcement participation." Richardson's expression didn't change, but I could see calculation behind his eyes as he decided how much to reveal. "Detective, what you found in that basement represents 15 years of intelligence gathering on foreign operatives and domestic terrorists. Every person in those photographs was connected to threats against national security. The elimination of those threats through unofficial channels has prevented terrorist attacks, industrial espionage, and foreign intelligence operations that could have cost thousands of American lives." Murphy was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were clear and focused. "And the local cops on your payroll? Are they all patriots saving America, or just criminals you've bought off? Richardson glanced at Rodriguez, who was standing nearby with his tactical team, before answering. Operational security requires certain accommodations from local law enforcement, Richardson said carefully. Not everyone involved needs to understand the full scope of what we're doing, just their specific role in supporting legitimate national security objectives. The financial arrangements ensure cooperation and discretion. I looked around the warehouse at all the people involved in this operation. Too many for a small FBI task force, too well equipped for a local police corruption scheme. Richardson, who do you really work for? Because this looks bigger than the Bureau, bigger than any law enforcement agency I know about. His smile became more genuine, as if I'd asked a question he'd been hoping to hear. Detective Santos, you're more perceptive than your personnel file suggested. This operation involves multiple agencies working together to address threats that fall between the cracks of normal jurisdictional boundaries. FBI, CIA, NSA, Defense Intelligence, and selected local law enforcement assets. We operate outside normal oversight because the threats we face don't respect normal boundaries. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture that was both more complex and more terrifying than simple police corruption. This was some kind of interagency task force operating with minimal oversight, using local law enforcement as cover for extrajudicial killings. People who posed threats to national security, however those threats were defined, were being eliminated without due process or legal authorization. "Show them the list," Richardson said to one of his subordinates, who brought over a tablet computer. The screen displayed names, photographs, and detailed intelligence reports on dozens of individuals. These are current active threats operating in your jurisdiction. Foreign intelligence operatives, terrorist facilitators, corporate spies, and domestic extremists. All of them beyond the reach of normal law enforcement. All of them requiring alternative solutions. I recognized some of the faces from missing persons reports we'd worked over the years. People who had vanished without a trace. Cases that had gone cold despite extensive investigation. Now, I understood why. They hadn't been random disappearances or murders. They had been targeted eliminations carried out by this shadow organization. "You're talking about assassination," Murphy said bluntly. "Government-sanctioned murder of American citizens without trial, without due process, without any oversight or accountability. That's not law enforcement, that's fascism." Richardson's expression hardened, and for the first time I saw genuine anger in his eyes. "Detective Murphy, those American citizens were working to destroy this country from within. They were planning terrorist attacks, stealing military secrets, coordinating with foreign enemies. The normal legal system is too slow, too restrictive, too vulnerable to manipulation by hostile forces. Sometimes decisive action is required to protect innocent lives." But even as Richardson spoke, I could see the flaws in his logic. Who decided who was a threat? Who provided oversight for these decisions? And how many innocent people had been killed because someone made a mistake or had ulterior motives? The power to eliminate people without trial was the kind of authority that inevitably led to abuse and corruption. "What about Sarah Matthews?" I asked, remembering a case from 3 years ago. 26-year-old accountant found dead in the Monongahela River. You had her listed as a terrorist facilitator, but she was just a grad student working part-time at a consulting firm. Richardson consulted his tablet, scrolling through files until he found the relevant entry. Sarah Matthews was laundering money for a Syrian terrorist cell through her employer's accounts. She had transferred over $2 million to overseas accounts connected to known terrorist organizations. Her death prevented funding for 3 planned attacks on American soil. The clinical way he discussed her death, as if she was just another item to be checked off a list, made my stomach turn. "And you know this how?" Murphy pressed. "Did you have evidence that would hold up in court? Did you try to arrest her, offer her a deal to cooperate, give her any chance to defend herself? Or did you just decide she was guilty and execute her?" Richardson's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Detective, we had electronic surveillance, financial records, intercepted communications, and physical evidence linking her to terrorist activities. More than enough to convict in any court. But by the time a case made it through the legal system, those 3 attacks would have already happened. Hundreds of innocent Americans would have died while we waited for due process to run its course." I thought about Sarah Matthews, about the way her body had been found posed in the same ritualistic manner as Kellerman's victims. "So, you used Kellerman's methods to make her death look like the work of a serial killer. How many other murders did you disguise that way?" The question hung in the air for several seconds before Richardson answered. "James Kellerman provided the perfect cover for our operations. His psychological profile, his methods, his signature. We studied everything about him and replicated it when we needed to eliminate targets without raising suspicions. Local law enforcement would investigate, find the familiar patterns, and file the cases under an inactive serial killer. No one looked for conspiracy because everyone assumed they already knew who was responsible. Except Kellerman disappeared in 2009, I pointed out. How did you explain continued murders in his style after he vanished?" Richardson smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuinely amused rather than coldly professional. "James Kellerman didn't disappear, Detective Santos. He became a valuable asset to our operation. His expertise in torture, interrogation, and psychological manipulation proved invaluable for extracting information from high-value targets before their elimination. He's been working for us for 15 years, conducting operations across multiple states under federal protection." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Kellerman, the serial killer who had terrorized our city, the monster who had murdered 7 innocent women, was not only alive, but working for the federal government. They had recruited him, given him official sanction to continue his crimes, turned him into an asset instead of bringing him to justice. "You made a deal with a serial killer," Murphy said, his voice filled with disgust. "You gave him protection and resources to continue murdering people just with different targets. How is that any different from the crimes he committed before?" Richardson's expression became defensive, as if he'd been asked to justify a difficult but necessary decision. Kellerman's psychological profile made him perfect for certain types of operations. He has no emotional attachment to his targets, no moral qualms about using extreme methods, and extensive experience in breaking down psychological resistance. His previous crimes demonstrated his capabilities. We simply redirected those capabilities toward legitimate national security objectives. I thought about all the families who had never gotten closure, who still wondered what had happened to their loved ones, who lived with the pain of knowing that Kellerman had escaped justice. "What about his original victims?" I demanded. "What about their families? They deserve to know that their daughter's killer is still alive, still killing, just with government approval now. Detective, those families have closure. They believe Kellerman is dead or disappeared, and they've moved on with their lives. Revealing the truth would only reopen old wounds and compromise ongoing operations. Sometimes the greater good requires accepting painful realities." The casual dismissal of victims' rights and families' need for justice revealed everything I needed to know about Richardson's moral compass. Murphy was studying the command center equipment, noting details that might be useful later. How long has this operation been running? How many people have you killed in the name of national security? Richardson consulted his tablet again, scrolling through what appeared to be extensive records. The operation began in 2008, initially as a joint task force to address emerging terrorist threats following 9/11. Over the past 16 years, we have successfully eliminated 847 confirmed threats to national security, prevented an estimated 23 terrorist attacks, and disrupted numerous foreign intelligence operations. The statistical success rate speaks for itself. 847 people. Nearly 1,000 American citizens eliminated without trial, without due process, without any oversight beyond whatever internal review this shadow organization conducted. The scope of the murders was staggering, far beyond anything I could have imagined when we first discovered the hidden room. And local law enforcement? I asked. How many police departments have you corrupted to provide cover for your operations? Richardson's expression suggested this was a sore subject, something that hadn't gone according to plan. We work with selected assets in approximately 40 departments across 12 states. Most officers involved know only their specific role: evidence disposal, crime scene contamination, witness intimidation. Full operational knowledge is limited to senior personnel who have been thoroughly vetted and recruited. The arrangement has been mostly successful. The word mostly suggested that there had been problems, officers who had discovered too much or refused to cooperate. I wondered how many cops had been eliminated when they became inconvenient. How many line-of-duty deaths had actually been murders to protect this conspiracy. What happens to officers who don't cooperate? Murphy asked, echoing my thoughts. What happens to cops who discover the truth and decide they can't be part of it? Richardson's pause before answering told us everything we needed to know. Non-cooperative personnel are transferred, reassigned, or retired depending on the level of their knowledge and the potential threat they represent. In extreme cases, more decisive action may be required to protect operational security. The euphemisms couldn't hide what he was really saying. Cops who refused to play along were eliminated just like any other threat. I looked around the warehouse again, at all the people involved in this operation, at the sophisticated equipment and coordination required to pull off murders across multiple states for over a decade. Richardson, this isn't about national security. This is about power. The power to decide who lives and dies without accountability, without oversight, without consequences. You've created a secret police force that operates outside the law and above the law. Detective Santos, the world changed after September 11th. The threats we face require new approaches, new tools, new willingness to make difficult decisions. Traditional law enforcement is inadequate for dealing with enemies who don't respect legal boundaries or constitutional protections. Sometimes protecting democracy requires acting outside democratic institutions. The circular logic was maddening. They had appointed themselves as the ultimate arbiters of who deserved to live or die, justifying murder by claiming it was necessary to protect a system they were actively undermining. Every principle of justice, due process, and constitutional protection had been abandoned in favor of expediency and power. So, what happens to us now? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. We had seen too much, learned too much, documented too much evidence of their operations. Even if they tried to recruit us, we would always be a security risk. And given our response to their recruitment pitch, it was clear that we would never willingly cooperate. That depends, Richardson said, consulting his watch. Your partner uploaded files to several external servers before we could stop him. We've been monitoring the recipients, and most of them are legitimate law enforcement agencies or journalists who can be managed through appropriate channels. but we need to know if there are any other copies, any other people who might have access to this information. Murphy met my eyes, and I could see the calculation there. The dead man's switch was still armed, set to release everything in less than 4 hours if he didn't check in. They might be able to intercept some of the uploads, suppress some of the stories, but they couldn't control everything. The evidence would get out, and people would start asking questions. "There are no other copies," Murphy lied smoothly. "Everything we found was uploaded to the servers you already know about. If you can suppress those, you can contain the leak." Richardson studied him carefully, probably trying to determine if he was telling the truth. The polygraph equipment in the command center suggested they had ways of verifying statements. "We'll need to confirm that," Richardson said finally. "Both of you will be transferred to a secure facility for debriefing. If you cooperate fully, answer all questions honestly, and help us identify any remaining security breaches, we might be able to work out an arrangement that keeps you alive." The threat was clear. Cooperation meant survival. Resistance meant death. "What kind of arrangement?" I asked, stalling for time. Every minute that passed brought us closer to Murphy's dead man's switch activation. If we could keep them talking for 4 more hours, the evidence would be released automatically, and our deaths wouldn't stop the exposure of their operations. Relocation, new identities, comfortable retirement in a location far from any ongoing operations. Think of it as a witness protection program for people who have seen too much. You disappear completely, but you get to live. Richardson's tone suggested this was a generous offer, better than what most people in our situation could expect. "And if we refuse?" Murphy asked. Richardson's expression didn't change, but the tension in the room increased noticeably. Everyone knew what the alternative was, but no one wanted to say it explicitly. "Then you become a security threat that needs to be eliminated," Richardson said kindly. "Your deaths will be tragic but explainable. 2 detectives killed while investigating a dangerous criminal organization. The case will be classified, the evidence will disappear, and your families will never know the truth about what happened to you." I thought about my ex-husband, about the daughter I rarely saw because of my dedication to the job, about all the cases I'd worked and victims I'd tried to help. If I disappeared into some federal witness protection program, would any of it have mattered? Would justice ever be served for the hundreds of people this organization had murdered? "We need time to think about it," I said, hoping to buy more time for the dead man's switch to activate. Richardson checked his watch again and shook his head. "Detective, we're on a tight schedule. Other operations are planned for tonight, and we need to know your decision before we can proceed. You have 30 minutes to discuss your options and give us an answer." The deadline was clearly designed to prevent us from developing any escape plans or finding ways to contact outside help. Richardson walked away to confer with his subordinates, leaving us under guard but able to talk quietly. Murphy leaned closer and whispered, 3 hours and 20 minutes until the switch activates. If we can delay them that long, everything gets released automatically." The guards were watching us closely, but they couldn't hear our whispered conversation over the ambient noise of the command center. "They're going to polygraph us," I whispered back. "They'll know about the dead man's switch as soon as they start asking detailed questions. We need to either escape or find a way to disable their equipment." The polygraph machines were sophisticated, probably military-grade equipment that would detect any attempt at deception. I studied the warehouse layout, looking for potential escape routes or weaknesses in their security. The main entrance was heavily guarded, but there were loading docks on the far side of the building that might be less well defended. The problem was getting there without being shot by guards who had already demonstrated their willingness to use lethal force. "Maria," Murphy whispered, "even if we escape, they'll hunt us for the rest of our lives. This organization has resources, connections, and no moral constraints. We'll never be safe as long as they exist." He was right. Even if we survived tonight, even if the evidence was released and the story became public, there would always be people who wanted revenge for the exposure of their operations. Then we make sure the exposure is so complete, so damaging, that they can't afford to come after us, I whispered back. The dead man's switch is just the beginning. We need to find ways to keep the story alive, keep investigators digging, make ourselves more valuable alive than dead as witnesses and sources. Richardson was walking back toward us, his expression grim. Behind him, technicians were setting up what looked like interrogation equipment: polygraph machines, cameras, recording devices. They were preparing for a thorough debriefing that would extract every piece of information we possessed before making their final decision about our fate. "Detectives," Richardson said, "I'm afraid the timeline has been accelerated. We've received intelligence about potential security breaches that require immediate action. We need your decision now, and we need complete cooperation if you choose to accept our offer." The urgency in his voice suggested that something had gone wrong with their other operations. "What kind of security breaches?" I asked, genuinely curious about what might have rattled an organization that seemed so confident in its power and secrecy. Richardson hesitated before answering, clearly debating how much to reveal. "Other law enforcement personnel have been asking questions about missing evidence, unexplained crime scene contamination, and suspicious deaths in cases dating back several years. Your investigation may have triggered broader scrutiny that threatens multiple ongoing operations." The admission revealed a critical weakness. Their operations depended on secrecy and the cooperation of corrupt officers. If too many honest cops started asking questions, the entire conspiracy could unravel. "Good," Murphy said with satisfaction. "Maybe there are still some real police officers left who care about justice more than payoffs." Richardson's jaw tightened at the insult, but he maintained professional composure. "Detective Murphy, those real police officers don't understand the bigger picture. They see individual cases, isolated incidents, local crimes. They don't see the patterns, the connections, the strategic threats that require coordinated response. Their interference could cost American lives." The rationalization was getting weaker, more desperate, as if Richardson was trying to convince himself as much as us. I made my decision. "Richardson, here's our answer. We'll cooperate fully with your debriefing, answer all your questions honestly, and help you identify any security breaches." His expression brightened slightly, thinking he'd successfully recruited us. "But in exchange, we want full immunity, official recognition as federal assets, and oversight authority over your operations going forward." The silence that followed was profound. Richardson stared at me as if I'd lost my mind, while his subordinates exchanged glances that ranged from amazement to anger. The audacity of demanding oversight authority over their shadow organization had clearly caught them off guard. "Detective Santos, I don't think you understand your negotiating position," Richardson said slowly. "You're not in a position to make demands. You're security threats who are being offered a generous opportunity to survive. Take the deal as offered, or face the consequences of refusal." "Actually, we understand our position perfectly," I replied. "We have evidence of systematic murder, corruption, and conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of federal law enforcement. That evidence is already in the hands of multiple recipients who will ask uncomfortable questions if we disappear. You need us more than we need you." Richardson pulled out his phone and walked away from us, probably consulting with superiors about this unexpected development. The guards around us became more alert, hands resting on weapons, preparing for whatever orders they might receive. The tension in the warehouse was palpable, as everyone waited to see how this standoff would resolve. When Richardson returned, his expression was carefully neutral, revealing nothing about the conversation he'd just had. "Detectives, I've been authorized to make you a counteroffer. Full pardons for any crimes you may have committed during your investigation, financial compensation for your cooperation, and positions within our organization where you can help ensure that operations are conducted according to appropriate standards." It was a recruitment pitch disguised as a compromise, an attempt to bring us inside their conspiracy where we could be controlled and monitored. But it also revealed their desperation. They couldn't afford to kill us outright, and they couldn't afford to let us go free. We had become a problem that required careful management rather than simple elimination. "What kind of positions?" Murphy asked, playing along with the negotiation. "Because if you're offering us jobs as assassins, you can forget about it." Richardson's smile was thin and humorless. "Internal affairs, oversight, quality control, ensuring that operations are conducted professionally and targets are properly vetted. Think of yourselves as conscience advisors, helping us maintain appropriate standards while serving national security objectives." The euphemisms couldn't disguise what they were really offering: complicity in murder disguised as reform. I checked my phone discreetly and saw that we still had over 2 hours until the dead man's switch activated. 2 hours to keep them talking, keep them from conducting the polygraph examination that would reveal our deception, keep them believing that we might actually cooperate with their operations. We'll need time to review the organizational structure, understand the decision-making process, and evaluate the oversight mechanisms, I said, adopting a bureaucratic tone that suggested serious consideration of their offer. "This is a major career change that requires careful evaluation." Richardson nodded, apparently satisfied that we were taking their offer seriously. "Of course. We can provide you with briefing materials, organizational charts, operational procedures, everything you need to make an informed decision. But I must emphasize that this offer has a limited time frame. Other security considerations may force us to take alternative actions if negotiations are prolonged." The threat was still there, but now it was wrapped in the language of corporate negotiation rather than criminal intimidation. They were trying to legitimize their operations, make them seem like official government activities rather than the rogue conspiracy they actually represented. As Richardson's people brought over briefing materials and organizational charts, I began to understand the true scope of what we were facing. This wasn't just a rogue FBI operation or even a multi-agency task force. This was a shadow government organization with connections to defense contractors, intelligence agencies, foreign allies, and corporate interests that spanned multiple countries and industries. The organizational chart showed cells operating in major cities across the United States, each one compartmentalized and largely independent. Assassination teams, surveillance units, corruption specialists, and cover-up experts all working together to eliminate threats to what they defined as national security. The budget figures were staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars in black funding from sources that weren't clearly identified. "This is bigger than we thought," Murphy whispered as we pretended to study the documents. "This isn't just about dirty cops or even federal corruption. This is a parallel government operating completely outside constitutional authority." I nodded, making notes on the briefing materials while calculating how much longer we needed to stall. The operations manual revealed targeting criteria that went far beyond legitimate national security threats. Corporate whistleblowers, investigative journalists, political activists, and foreign nationals were all potential targets if they posed threats to American business interests or government policies. The definition of threat had been expanded to include anyone who might inconvenience powerful people or organizations. Richardson, I said, pointing to a section of the manual. These targeting criteria seem quite broad. How do you determine who actually deserves to be eliminated versus who's just exercising constitutional rights? The question was designed to provoke discussion and consume time, but it also revealed fundamental problems with their operations. Detective, constitutional rights are not absolute when they conflict with national security requirements, Richardson replied. Freedom of speech doesn't protect terrorist propaganda. Freedom of the press doesn't protect espionage. Freedom of assembly doesn't protect conspiracy against the government. We make those distinctions so that constitutional protections aren't used as weapons against the country they're supposed to defend. The circular logic was maddening, but it revealed their mindset clearly. They had appointed themselves as the ultimate arbiters of what constitutional rights people deserved, what speech was protected, what journalism was legitimate. It was the kind of authority that led inevitably to tyranny and oppression. Murphy was studying financial records showing payments to various individuals and organizations. These contractor payments, he said, some of them are going to private military companies, intelligence firms, and corporations that have government contracts. Are you outsourcing assassinations to private contractors? Some operations require specialized capabilities that government personnel don't possess, Richardson admitted. Private contractors provide flexibility, plausible deniability, and expertise in areas where federal employees might be constrained by regulations or oversight. It's a force multiplier that allows us to operate more effectively. I thought about all the implications of privatized assassination. Profit motives driving murder, corporate executives making life and death decisions, shareholders benefiting from contract killings disguised as national security operations. The corruption of the military-industrial complex had reached its logical conclusion in the commodification of murder. What about accountability? I asked. Who reviews these targeting decisions? Who ensures that innocent people aren't being eliminated by mistake or for personal reasons? Richardson's pause before answering suggested this was another sore subject. We have internal review processes, quality control measures, and oversight protocols that ensure appropriate standards are maintained, he said finally. But operational security requires that these processes remain classified and compartmentalized. External oversight would compromise effectiveness and put personnel at risk. In other words, they had no real accountability because accountability would interfere with their ability to operate in secrecy. It was the classic justification used by every authoritarian organization. Transparency and oversight were luxuries they couldn't afford in the face of existential threats. My phone showed that we had 90 minutes until the dead man's switch activated. The briefing session was taking longer than Richardson had probably planned, but his people seemed genuinely interested in convincing us to join their organization. They wanted us to believe we could reform it from within, make it more ethical and accountable, while still supporting its fundamental mission. Detective Santos, Richardson said, I can see you have concerns about our methods and oversight. That's exactly why we need people like you involved. Your experience in traditional law enforcement, your commitment to justice, your moral compass, these are valuable assets that can help us improve our operations while maintaining effectiveness. The recruitment pitch was sophisticated, appealing to my desire to make a difference while downplaying the moral compromises required. They wanted me to believe that I could be a force for good within their organization, that my participation would somehow legitimize their murders and make them more ethical. What guarantees do we have? Murphy asked. If we join your organization and later decide we can't live with what we're doing, what happens then? Can we resign? Can we transfer to other positions? Or are we committed for life? The question cut to the heart of what kind of organization they were really running. Once you have operational knowledge at this level, certain security constraints become permanent, Richardson admitted. But we provide excellent benefits, interesting work, and the satisfaction of knowing you're protecting American lives and interests. Most of our personnel find the work rewarding and choose to remain with the organization throughout their careers. The euphemisms couldn't hide the reality. Once you joined their conspiracy, you could never leave. You became complicit in their crimes, dependent on their protection, and vulnerable to elimination if you ever tried to expose their operations. It was a life sentence of moral compromise and criminal participation. I made a show of discussing the offer with Murphy, whispering and nodding as if we were seriously considering their proposal. In reality, we were coordinating our final moves, preparing for whatever would happen when the dead man's switch activated and their operations were exposed to the world. Richardson, I said finally, we appreciate the opportunity, but we need more time to consider all the implications. This is a major life decision that we can't make under pressure. Can we have until morning to discuss it privately and give you our final answer? The request was designed to sound reasonable while buying the time we needed. I'm afraid that's not possible, Richardson replied, checking his watch again. Other operations are scheduled for tonight, and we need to resolve your situation before proceeding. You have 30 more minutes to make your decision, and then we'll need to move forward with alternative arrangements. The deadline was clearly non-negotiable, which meant they were planning to eliminate us if we didn't agree to join their conspiracy. But it also meant that we only needed to survive for 1 more hour until the evidence was automatically released. Whatever happened after that, the truth would be out there for people to find. What alternative arrangements? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Richardson's expression became coldly professional, all pretense of negotiation abandoned. Detectives, if you refuse our offer, you become security threats that must be eliminated to protect ongoing operations. Your deaths will be regrettable but necessary, and they'll be explained in ways that protect the organization's interests. Your families will never know the truth about what happened to you. The casual way he discussed our murders, as if they were routine business decisions rather than the destruction of human lives, revealed everything about the kind of people we were dealing with. They had lost any sense of moral constraint or human empathy in their pursuit of power and control. Murphy and I exchanged glances, and I could see the same determination in his eyes that I felt in my own heart. We had become the guardians of evidence that could expose this conspiracy and bring justice for hundreds of victims. Even if it cost us our lives, we couldn't let their crimes continue in secrecy. Richardson, I said, standing up and facing him directly, here's our final answer. We will never join your organization, we will never cooperate with your murders, and we will never stop fighting to expose what you've done. You can kill us, but you can't kill the truth. Too many people know too much for your secrets to stay buried. The warehouse erupted into activity as guards reached for weapons and Richardson barked orders into his radio. But it was too late. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching, multiple vehicles moving fast toward our location. Someone had received the evidence we'd uploaded and was responding with overwhelming force. How? Richardson demanded, his composure finally cracking. We monitored all your communications, intercepted your uploads, contained the distribution. How did you get word out? Murphy smiled grimly as he showed Richardson his phone. Dead man's switch, he said simply. If I don't check in every 6 hours, everything gets released automatically to every law enforcement agency and journalist in our contact list. Your interrogation took too long, Richardson. The world is about to learn everything about your shadow organization. The sirens were getting closer, and I could see panic spreading through Richardson's people as they realized their carefully controlled situation was spiraling out of control. Some were destroying equipment, others were gathering intelligence files, and still others were preparing defensive positions for what was about to become a siege. "You've doomed us all," Richardson said, his face pale with anger and fear. "You have no idea what forces you've unleashed, what consequences your actions will have. This organization exists because it's necessary, because the threats we face require extreme measures. Without us, America is vulnerable to enemies who won't hesitate to exploit our constitutional constraints. Then maybe America needs to find better ways to defend itself," I replied. "Ways that don't require abandoning every principle we claim to stand for. Ways that don't require murder and corruption and conspiracy. You've become the very thing you claim to be fighting against." The first police cars were pulling into the warehouse parking lot, followed by federal vehicles and what looked like a SWAT team. Through the windows, I could see officers taking positions around the building, preparing for a coordinated assault on a federal operation that had gone completely off the rails. Richardson pulled out his phone and made one final call, his voice urgent and desperate. "This is Operation Oversight, requesting immediate extraction and evidence destruction protocols. The situation is compromised beyond recovery. Repeat, initiate scorched earth protocols immediately." He was trying to destroy evidence and escape before the building was surrounded. But it was too late. The warehouse was surrounded. The evidence was already in the hands of multiple agencies, and the conspiracy that had operated in darkness for 16 years was about to be exposed to the harsh light of justice. Richardson and his people had finally encountered something they couldn't control, couldn't corrupt, couldn't eliminate. As federal agents stormed into the warehouse, I realized that this was just the beginning. The evidence we'd released would trigger investigations across multiple states, expose corruption in dozens of police departments, and reveal a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. It would take years to unravel all the connections, prosecute all the criminals, and provide justice for all the victims. But for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. Hope that the system could still work when good people refused to be corrupted, refused to be silenced, refused to accept that murder was an acceptable tool of government. Hope that truth and justice were still possible, even in the face of overwhelming power and systematic corruption. The weight of evidence we'd carried for one terrible night had finally found its proper destination. Not hidden in shadows and buried in bureaucracy, but exposed to sunlight and subjected to the judgment of people who still believed in the principles this country was supposed to represent. How many more conspiracies were still operating in darkness, waiting for someone brave enough to shine a light on them? The radio crackled to life at 1:14 a.m., pulling me from the paperwork that had been keeping me company during another quiet shift. Officer Danny Reeves here, 12 years with the Millbrook Police Department, working the graveyard shift in a town where the most exciting call is usually a drunk driver or domestic disturbance. But tonight's call was different. A break-in at the old Municipal Records building, the one they'd been planning to demolish for the past 5 years. Unit 47, respond to 1247 Elm Street. Possible burglary in progress. Silent alarm triggered, no visual confirmation of suspects. Dispatch crackled through the static. The records building had been empty since the city moved all their files to digital storage and relocated to the new government center. Nothing left in there except old paper files and outdated equipment that wasn't worth stealing. Made me wonder why anyone would bother breaking in. I drove through the empty streets, past darkened storefronts and sleeping houses, toward the old part of town where they kept the buildings nobody wanted anymore. The Records building was a 3-story brick structure from the 1940s, the kind of imposing government architecture that was supposed to make citizens feel small and intimidated. Windows dark, parking lot empty, no obvious signs of forced entry from the street side. I parked across the street and radioed my arrival, then sat for a moment observing the building. Sometimes you learn more by watching than by charging in with your flashlight blazing. The silent alarm could have been triggered by anything. A loose window, a settling foundation, even a large rat setting off a motion detector. But as I studied the building, I noticed something that made me reconsider the routine nature of this call. There was a vehicle parked in the alley behind the building, barely visible from my position, but definitely there. A dark sedan, no lights, engine off, but still warm enough that I could see heat distortion rising from the hood. Someone had been here recently, and they'd tried to hide their presence. This wasn't a random break-in or false alarm. I got out of my patrol car and approached the building carefully, one hand on my flashlight and the other resting on my service weapon. The front entrance was locked and undamaged, but when I made my way around to the side, I found a basement window that had been carefully pried open. Not smashed or broken, opened with tools by someone who knew what they were doing and didn't want to leave obvious evidence. The basement window was too small for me to fit through, but I could see scratches in the window frame and disturbed dust on the sill. Someone had definitely entered through here, probably within the last hour based on the freshness of the marks. I radioed for backup and additional units, though I knew it would take at least 10 minutes for anyone else to arrive in our understaffed department. While waiting for backup, I decided to check the other entrances more thoroughly. The back door near the loading dock showed signs of recent tampering. Scratch marks around the lock that suggested someone had tried to pick it before giving up and using the window instead. Fresh footprints in the dirt led from the alley to the window and back again. At least 2 different sets of prints, maybe 3. This was looking less like a random burglary and more like a targeted operation by people who knew the building's layout and security systems. But what could possibly be worth stealing from an abandoned records building? All the valuable files had been transferred years ago, leaving behind only storage boxes full of decades-old documents that the city couldn't legally destroy, but didn't need regular access to. My backup arrived just as I was finishing my external examination. Officer Sarah Kim, a 5-year veteran who'd transferred to our department from the state police. She parked behind my cruiser and approached with the kind of cautious professionalism that suggested she'd seen her share of situations that looked routine, but turned deadly. "What do we have, Danny?" she asked, checking her equipment as she surveyed the building. I filled her in on what I'd observed: the hidden car, the jimmied window, the signs of professional entry techniques. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, then pointed something out that I'd missed. "Look at the pattern of those footprints," she said, kneeling next to the marks in the dirt. "They're not random. Someone walked directly from the car to the window, then back to the car, then back to the window again. Like they were carrying something heavy that required multiple trips." The observation was sharp, and immediately changed my assessment of what we were dealing with. If burglars were making multiple trips to remove items from the building, it suggested they were after something specific and valuable enough to justify the risk of extended exposure. But what could be worth that much effort in a building full of forgotten government paperwork? "Sarah, let's check that car in the alley before we go inside," I suggested. "If this is an active burglary, the suspects might still be in the building, and we need to know what we're walking into." we approached the sedan carefully, using our flashlights to examine the interior without getting too close. The car was a rental, based on the sticker in the rear window, but the plates were local. Inside, I could see maps of the city spread across the front seat, with the records building circled in red ink. More concerning were the photographs scattered on the dashboard. Surveillance shots of the building taken from different angles, some during the day and others at night. This wasn't a spontaneous crime. Someone had been planning this break-in for days or weeks. "Danny, look at this," Sarah said, pointing her flashlight at something near the car's rear bumper. There were wooden crates stacked against the alley wall, the kind used for shipping documents or fragile items. They were empty now, but fresh scratches and scuff marks suggested they'd been recently used to transport something heavy from the building to the car. The implications were troubling. Professional surveillance, specialized equipment, multiple trips to remove materials. This wasn't random theft. Someone with significant resources and planning capability was systematically extracting specific items from the records building. But what documents could be valuable enough to justify this level of effort and risk? "We need to get inside and see what they were after," I said, though every instinct was telling me that this situation was more dangerous than a routine burglary call. Sarah checked her radio to make sure we had communication with dispatch, then nodded toward the building. "Front entrance or basement window?" she asked. I considered the options. The front entrance would be safer and more familiar, but it would also be obvious and loud. If there were still people inside, they'd hear us coming and have time to prepare or escape. The basement window offered stealth, but limited our exit options if things went wrong. Front entrance, I decided. If this is as professional as it looks, they'll have someone watching the obvious approaches anyway. At least this way we won't be crawling through windows if we need to get out fast. Sarah agreed, and we made our way back to the main entrance. The front door was locked with an old-style deadbolt that hadn't been updated since the building was constructed. Sarah produced a set of lockpicks from her equipment belt, a skill she'd learned during her state police days when dealing with abandoned properties and welfare checks. Within 2 minutes, she had the lock open and we were inside the darkened lobby. The building smelled of dust, old paper, and something else. A faint chemical odor that didn't belong in an abandoned office building. Our flashlights revealed a lobby that looked exactly like what you'd expect from a government building that had been hastily evacuated. Furniture covered with sheets, boxes stacked against walls, and that particular kind of institutional neglect that accumulates when no one cares about maintaining appearances. But as we moved deeper into the building, it became clear that someone had been here recently and had been conducting a systematic search. File cabinets had been opened and their contents scattered across the floor. Boxes had been moved, opened, and rearranged. Someone was looking for something specific among all these forgotten records. "Sarah, check this out," I whispered, pointing my flashlight at a section of the lobby where the disturbance was particularly obvious. Someone had created a sorting area, separating documents into different piles based on criteria that weren't immediately obvious. Some papers were stacked neatly, others were scattered and abandoned, and still others had been placed in those wooden crates we'd seen in the alley. The documents that had been selected for removal appeared to be related to specific time periods and city departments. Police records from the 1990s, budget documents from the same era, personnel files for city employees who had long since retired or died. There was a pattern here, but I couldn't immediately see what connected these particular documents. "Danny, this chemical smell is getting stronger," Sarah observed. "Someone's been using some kind of solvent or accelerant in here. Look at this." She directed her flashlight at a section of the floor where there were obvious stains, and the smell was particularly intense. Someone had been systematically destroying certain documents while preserving others. The realization hit both of us at the same time. This wasn't just document theft, it was selective destruction of evidence. Someone was eliminating specific records while making it look like random vandalism or theft. They were rewriting history by removing inconvenient facts from the official record. As we moved toward the basement stairs, following the path the intruders had obviously taken multiple times, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something much more dangerous than a simple break-in. Someone with the resources to plan and execute this operation wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses if necessary. And if these documents were important enough to steal and destroy, they might be important enough to kill for. "Sarah," I whispered as we approached the basement door, "maybe we should call this in and wait for more backup. This is starting to feel like something bigger than we can handle." But even as I said it, I knew we couldn't wait. If there were still people in the building, every minute we delayed gave them more time to complete their mission and escape. The basement door was open, and we could see light coming from somewhere below. Not electric lighting, but the warm glow of battery-powered lanterns. Someone was definitely still down there, working by artificial light to avoid detection from outside. We could hear faint sounds of movement, papers being shuffled, and occasional voices speaking in low tones. "At least 2 people," Sarah whispered, drawing her service weapon. "Maybe more. They're not trying to be quiet anymore, which means they're either almost finished or they don't care about being detected." Neither possibility was encouraging from our perspective. I drew my own weapon and checked my radio one more time to ensure we had communication with dispatch. Whatever we were about to discover in that basement, whatever documents were worth this much effort to steal or destroy, I had a feeling that our quiet night shift was about to become the most important call of our careers. The voices below were getting more urgent, and I could hear the sound of equipment being packed up. They were preparing to leave, which meant we were running out of time to intercept them and discover what they'd been doing. Sarah and I exchanged glances and began our descent into the basement, knowing that we were about to confront something that would change everything we thought we knew about our quiet little town. The basement stairs creaked under our weight despite our efforts to move quietly, and the voices below immediately stopped. Sarah and I froze halfway down the stairs, weapons drawn, listening for any indication of how many people we were dealing with and whether they were armed. The silence stretched for several seconds before we heard the sound of rapid movement and whispered conversations. "Police, come out with your hands visible," I called down, following standard procedure even though I suspected these weren't ordinary burglars who would surrender peacefully. The response was immediate. The sound of papers being frantically shuffled, equipment being moved, and what sounded like someone trying to force open a window or door. Sarah gestured for me to continue down while she covered the stairs, and I moved carefully into the basement proper. What I saw there made me understand why someone would go to such elaborate lengths to access this abandoned building. The basement wasn't just a storage area. It was a systematic archive of documents that had been carefully organized and preserved, unlike the chaotic mess we'd seen upstairs. But, more importantly, someone had set up a sophisticated document processing operation down here. High-end scanners, computer equipment, industrial-grade paper shredders, and what appeared to be chemical baths for dissolving certain types of ink or paper. This wasn't theft. It was intelligence gathering and evidence destruction on a massive scale. "Danny, movement to your left," Sarah called out, and I spun around to see a figure in dark clothing diving behind a row of filing cabinets. I caught a glimpse of face, middle-aged, professional-looking, definitely not your typical burglar. This person had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority and comfortable with planning complex operations. "Police, stop and show your hands," I shouted, moving to get a better angle on the suspect's position. But instead of compliance, I heard the sound of papers being fed into a shredder, someone frantically destroying evidence even as we closed in on their position. Whatever documents they were after, they considered them important enough to risk arrest, or worse, to keep them secret. Sarah had reached the bottom of the stairs and was moving to flank the filing cabinets from the other direction. 2 suspects, she called out quietly. One behind the cabinets, one near the far wall operating some kind of equipment. The coordination suggested these weren't random criminals, but people with training and experience in conducting covert operations. I could see the glow of computer screens near the far wall, and the sound of high-speed scanning equipment suggested that someone was digitizing documents as fast as possible. They weren't just destroying evidence. They were preserving copies for their own use while eliminating the originals from official records. "This is Officer Reeves, Millbrook PD," I called out, trying to establish communication. "We know you're here. We know what you're doing, and backup is on the way. Come out now, and we can resolve this peacefully." The response was not what I expected. "Officer Reeves," a voice called back from behind the filing cabinets, "you're interfering with a federal investigation. Stand down and exit the building immediately, or face charges for obstruction of justice." The tone was authoritative, confident, and completely at odds with what should be a desperate criminal caught in the act. "Federal investigation?" I replied, glancing at Sarah, who looked as confused as I felt. "Show me some identification and explain what you're doing in a locked municipal building without authorization." The claim of federal authority was either a desperate bluff or an indication that this situation was much more complex than we'd realized. "Agent Morrison, FBI," the voice responded, and a hand appeared above the filing cabinets holding what looked like federal credentials. "We're conducting a classified investigation into corruption in local government. These documents contain evidence of criminal activity that requires federal intervention." Sarah and I exchanged glances, both of us trying to process this unexpected development. If these were really federal agents, we could be interfering with a legitimate operation. But their methods, breaking and entering, destroying documents, operating without local law enforcement notification, didn't match any federal procedure I was familiar with. "Agent Morrison," I called back, "we're going to need to verify your credentials and get confirmation from your supervisor before we can stand down. In the meantime, stop destroying documents and step out where we can see you." The request was reasonable, but the response suggested that reasonableness wasn't going to resolve this situation. "Officer, I don't have time for your bureaucratic procedures," Morrison replied, his voice becoming more tense. "This operation is time-sensitive, and every minute you delay compromises federal interests. I'm ordering you to withdraw immediately and forget you were ever here." The arrogance and urgency in his voice convinced me that something was seriously wrong with this situation. Real federal agents would understand the need for verification and coordination with local law enforcement. They wouldn't destroy evidence or operate in secrecy unless they were hiding something that wouldn't survive official scrutiny. "Sarah," I whispered, "call dispatch and request immediate backup. Plus, contact the FBI field office to verify whether they have any operations running in our jurisdiction." She nodded and began speaking quietly into her radio, while I maintained visual contact with the area where our suspects were hiding. The sound of document destruction had stopped, replaced by urgent whispered conversations between the suspects. I could hear fragments. "Local interference. Abort and extract. Too much exposure." That suggested they were planning to abandon their operation and escape before more officers arrived. "Agent Morrison," I called out, "we've contacted the FBI field office to verify your credentials. They should be able to confirm your operation within a few minutes. Until then, everyone stays put and keeps their hands visible." The silence that followed was ominous, broken only by the sound of equipment being quickly shut down. Sarah finished her radio call and gave me a thumbs down. The FBI field office had no knowledge of any operations in Millbrook, and Agent Morrison wasn't in their database. Whatever these people were doing, it wasn't legitimate federal law enforcement activity. We were dealing with criminals who were using false credentials and authority to cover their crimes. "Danny, the FBI says they have no operations here and no Agent Morrison," Sarah whispered. "Backup is 5 minutes out, but these people are getting ready to run. We need to contain them now." I nodded, knowing that we couldn't let whoever these people were escape with whatever information they'd gathered. "Morrison," I called out, dropping the pretense of federal cooperation. "We've confirmed that you're not FBI. Come out now with your hands up, or we'll assume you're armed and dangerous criminals." The response was immediate, and not what I'd hoped for. The sound of breaking glass came from the far wall, followed by shouts and the crash of equipment being overturned. Someone was making a break for what was probably a basement window or emergency exit, trying to escape with whatever they'd gathered. Sarah moved to intercept while I maintained position to prevent the other suspect from following. "Stop! Police!" Sarah shouted, and I heard the sound of a brief struggle before she called out, "One suspect in custody, one escaped through the window." I moved quickly to secure the area around the filing cabinets, finding Morrison crouched behind a row of boxes with his hands finally visible. "On the ground, hands behind your head," I ordered, and this time he complied, though his expression suggested anger rather than defeat. As I cuffed him, I could see that he was older than I'd initially thought, probably in his 50s, with the kind of professional appearance that suggested white-collar crime rather than breaking and entering. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Morrison said as I secured him. "These documents expose corruption that goes back decades. People died to keep these secrets buried, and more people will die if the truth comes out." The comment was both threatening and intriguing, suggesting that whatever they'd been after was connected to serious crimes. Sarah returned from pursuing the escaped suspect, shaking her head. "Lost him in the alley. He had a car waiting and was gone before I could get close enough for identification." She looked around the basement at the sophisticated equipment and scattered documents. "Danny, this isn't random. Look at what they brought down here." The document processing setup was impressive and expensive. Professional-grade scanners capable of digitizing hundreds of pages per hour, encryption software for securing the copied files, and chemical baths for destroying original documents without leaving traces. This was the kind of operation that required significant funding and technical expertise. More concerning were the documents themselves. As I examined the papers scattered around the processing area, I began to see patterns that explained why someone would go to such lengths to obtain them. Police incident reports from the 1990s that had been marked classified or sealed. Budget documents showing unexplained payments to individuals and organizations. Personnel files for city employees who had died under suspicious circumstances. "Morrison," I said, kneeling next to where he was secured. "What's so important about 20-year-old municipal records? Who were you working for? And why are these documents worth breaking federal laws to obtain?" His smile was cold and knowing, suggesting that he understood something about the situation that I didn't. "Officer Reeves, you think you stumbled onto a simple burglary, but you've actually uncovered something much more dangerous," Morrison said. "These documents prove that your police department has been covering up murders, taking bribes, and eliminating witnesses for decades. The people involved in that corruption are still alive, still in positions of power, and they will do anything to keep their secrets buried." The accusation hit like a physical blow. The idea that my own department, people I'd worked with and trusted for 12 years, might be involved in systematic corruption and murder was almost impossible to process. But as I looked around at the evidence of their sophisticated operation, I began to understand why someone would be so desperate to control these particular documents. "You're lying," I said, though I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. "Even if there was corruption years ago, the people involved would be long gone by now. This is ancient history." Morrison's laugh was bitter and knowing. "Officer, half the current command staff were patrol officers or detectives during the period covered by these documents. Your chief, your lieutenant, your sergeant, they all knew what was happening, and some of them were directly involved. These records would destroy careers and send people to prison for life." The scope of what he was suggesting was staggering. Sarah was photographing the documents and equipment with her phone, preserving evidence of what we'd discovered. "Danny, look at some of these incident reports," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Suspicious deaths ruled as accidents or suicides, evidence that disappeared from crime scenes, witnesses who died in convenient accidents. If even half of this is true, there's been a conspiracy to cover up serious crimes for 20 years. I examined some of the documents she was pointing to, and the patterns were disturbing. Multiple cases where evidence had been lost or destroyed, witnesses had recanted their statements or died before trial, and investigations had been suddenly closed without explanation. The common thread was always the same handful of officers who had been present at critical moments when cases fell apart. Morrison, even if what you're saying is true, what you're doing is still illegal," I said. "Breaking and entering, destroying evidence, impersonating federal agents. You're criminals regardless of what these documents contain." His expression became more serious, almost sympathetic. "Officer Reeves, do you think official channels would have worked? Do you think filing complaints or requesting investigations would have exposed this corruption when the people you'd be complaining to are the same people involved in the cover-up?" The question was uncomfortable because I couldn't immediately think of a good answer. The sound of approaching sirens indicated that our backup was finally arriving, but I wasn't sure if that was good news or a catastrophe. If Morrison was telling the truth about corruption in the department, then some of the officers responding to our call might be part of the conspiracy he was trying to expose. We could be about to hand over evidence of their crimes directly to the people who were trying to hide it. "Sarah," I whispered urgently, "we need to be very careful about who we trust with this information. If there really is corruption in the department, we don't know who might be involved." She nodded grimly, understanding the implications immediately. Morrison overheard our conversation, and his expression became more urgent. "Officers, you're about to face a choice that will define the rest of your careers and possibly your lives. You can hand me over to your corrupt colleagues and let them bury this evidence, or you can help me get this information to people who can actually do something with it." The offer was tempting, but also terrifying in its implications. The first backup units were pulling into the parking lot, their red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of the records building. I could hear car doors slamming and voices coordinating their approach to the building. Within minutes, we'd be joined by other officers, and whatever decision we made about Morrison and his evidence would have to be made quickly. "Morrison, even if I believed everything you're saying, why should we trust you?" I asked. "You broke into a government building, destroyed evidence, and lied about being a federal agent. How do we know you're not just a criminal trying to manipulate us?" His expression became more earnest, almost desperate. "Because I used to be one of them," he said quietly. "Detective Frank Morrison, Millbrook PD, 1987 to 2003. I was part of the corruption until I couldn't live with what we were doing. When I tried to come forward, they destroyed my career, threatened my family, and forced me into hiding. I've spent 20 years gathering evidence to expose what they did, and tonight was my only chance to get the original documents before they're destroyed forever. The claim that he was a former Millbrook detective was verifiable and would explain his knowledge of the building layout and document storage systems. It would also explain his professional appearance and familiarity with police procedures. But it raised even more troubling questions about the scope and duration of the alleged corruption. "Sarah, check the personnel records," I said. "See if there was a Detective Frank Morrison in the department during those years." She was already accessing the database on her mobile terminal, scrolling through employment records that went back to the department's founding. "Here," she said, showing me the screen. "Detective Franklin Morrison, hired 1987, terminated 2003 for insubordination and failure to follow procedures. No criminal charges, but marked as ineligible for rehire." The official record was consistent with his story, though it didn't prove that his version of events was accurate. The footsteps of approaching officers were getting closer, and I could hear familiar voices calling out our location. Sergeant Williams was leading the response team, along with Officers Rodriguez and Thompson, all of them department veterans who would have been around during the period Morrison was talking about. If his accusations were true, we were about to turn evidence over to the very people who had committed the crimes. "Morrison, if you're telling the truth, what do you want us to do?" I asked. "We can't just let you go, and we can't ignore the crimes you've committed tonight." His response was immediate and desperate. "Help me get these documents to the state police or the FBI. Real FBI, not the fake credentials I used tonight. Give me 5 minutes to copy the most important files to this drive," he said, producing a small storage device from his pocket. "These records prove that 7 people were murdered to protect this conspiracy, including 2 police officers who tried to expose it." The sound of officers entering the building upstairs made the decision urgent. Sarah and I looked at each other, both understanding that whatever choice we made would have consequences that extended far beyond tonight's events. If we helped Morrison, we'd be risking our careers and possibly our lives. If we didn't, potential evidence of murder and corruption might disappear forever. "Danny, incoming radio traffic," Sarah said, listening to her earpiece. "Sergeant Williams is asking for our status and location. We need to decide right now." The weight of the decision was crushing, but looking at the sophisticated equipment and scattered documents around us, I knew what we had to do. "Give him the drive," I said to Morrison. "Copy whatever you can in the next 2 minutes, then we'll figure out how to get it to someone who can investigate properly." Morrison's relief was visible as he moved quickly to one of the computers and began transferring files. "Officers Reeves and Kim, respond please." Sergeant Williams' voice crackled through our radios. "What's your status down there?" I keyed my radio, trying to buy Morrison more time while staying within the bounds of truthful reporting. "Sergeant Williams, we have 1 suspect in custody in the basement. 1 escaped. Still securing the scene and cataloging evidence. Need a few more minutes before we can give you a full report." The response was professional and routine, giving no indication of the dilemma we were facing. Morrison was working frantically at the computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he copied files and organized data. "Almost finished," he said. "These files contain everything. The original murder investigations, the evidence that was destroyed, the witnesses who were eliminated, and the financial records showing payments to corrupt officers." Sarah was watching the stairway, listening for approaching footsteps. "Danny, they're coming down. Williams and at least 2 others." The sound of heavy boots on the stairs confirmed her observation, and I knew our time was up. Morrison finished his copying and handed me the storage drive, his eyes urgent and pleading. Officer Reeves, these files contain the evidence needed to bring justice for people who died protecting the truth. Don't let their sacrifice be meaningless. I pocketed the drive just as Sergeant Williams appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "Reeves, Kim, good work securing the suspect," Williams said, surveying the basement scene. "What do we have here?" His tone was professional and routine, but I found myself studying his expression for any sign that he recognized the significance of what Morrison had been doing. "Suspect claims to be a former department employee, sir," I reported. "Says his name is Frank Morrison, detective from 1987 to 2003. He was using sophisticated equipment to copy and destroy municipal records, though we haven't determined his motivation yet." Williams's expression didn't change, but I thought I saw a brief flicker of recognition at Morrison's name. "Frank Morrison," Williams repeated slowly. "Haven't heard that name in years. Troubled officer, made a lot of unfounded accusations before he was terminated. Probably holds a grudge against the department." The dismissive tone seemed calculated to discredit anything Morrison might say about his discoveries. Morrison looked up from where he was secured on the floor. "Hello, Williams." "Still covering for murderers and taking bribes from drug dealers." The accusation was direct and personal, suggesting a history between the two men that went beyond professional disagreement. "You always were paranoid, Morrison," Williams replied calmly. 20 years of bitterness haven't improved your perspective." But I noticed that he'd positioned himself between Morrison and the evidence scattered around the room, as if he was trying to prevent him from pointing out specific documents. Officers Rodriguez and Thompson had joined us in the basement, and they were examining the equipment and documents with what seemed like excessive interest. Rodriguez picked up some of the papers Morrison had been processing, scanning them quickly before setting them aside. Thompson was photographing the computer setup, but from angles that obscured the screen contents rather than documenting them clearly. "Sergeant, what do you want us to do with all this equipment and documentation?" I asked, testing Williams' response. "Should we preserve everything for evidence, or is some of it just historical records with no investigative value?" The question was designed to see if he would try to minimize the importance of what Morrison had been gathering. "Most of this looks like old municipal paperwork that should have been disposed of years ago," Williams said after a quick examination. "We'll catalog the obvious criminal evidence, the breaking and entering tools, the fake federal credentials, but the rest is probably just junk that accumulated over decades of poor record-keeping." The casual dismissal of potentially crucial evidence confirmed my worst suspicions about Williams' involvement in whatever Morrison was trying to expose. A professional investigation would preserve everything until its relevance could be determined, not make summary judgments about importance based on a brief visual inspection. "Sir, some of these documents appear to be original police reports and evidence files," Sarah said carefully. "Shouldn't they be examined by detectives to determine if they're connected to any active or cold cases?" Her question was professionally appropriate, but also served to test Williams' reaction to preserving evidence. "Kim, these are 20-year-old files that were scheduled for destruction anyway," Williams replied with a hint of irritation. "Our time is better spent on current cases than digging through ancient paperwork that has no relevance to modern policing." The response was telling. He was actively discouraging investigation of the very documents that Morrison claimed contained evidence of corruption. As we prepared to transport Morrison to the station for booking, I realized that Sarah and I were now in possession of evidence that could either expose a massive conspiracy or destroy our careers if we were wrong. The storage drive in my pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and every decision we made from this point forward would have consequences we couldn't fully anticipate. "Reeves, You and Kim handle the transport and booking," Williams ordered. "Rodriguez and Thompson will secure the scene and arrange for cleanup of all this mess. I want this building cleared and sealed by morning." The assignment separated us from the other officers, which could be either fortunate or dangerous depending on their level of involvement in the alleged corruption. As we escorted Morrison out of the building and toward our patrol car, he managed to whisper urgently, "The drive contains everything you need to verify my story. Contact Detective Linda Chen at the State Police. She's been investigating corruption in local departments for 5 years. She'll know what to do with the evidence." The recommendation gave us a specific contact outside our department who might be trustworthy. "Morrison, shut up!" Williams called out as we passed him near the building entrance. "Anything you say can and will be used against you, and I strongly advise you to exercise your right to remain silent." The warning was standard procedure, but his tone suggested genuine concern about what Morrison might reveal. During the drive to the station, Morrison continued to provide information despite the risk. "Officers, the corruption involves at least 6 current department members, including Williams, Captain Hayes, and Detective Martinez. They've been taking money from drug dealers, covering up murders, and eliminating anyone who threatens their operation. The files on that drive prove everything." Sarah and I listened without responding, both of us understanding that we were now committed to a course of action that would either bring justice to victims of a massive conspiracy or end our careers in law enforcement. The evidence Morrison had gathered would have to be evaluated by someone with the authority and independence to investigate corruption at the highest levels of our department. "Sarah," I said quietly, "after we book Morrison, we need to find a way to contact this Detective Chen without using department resources. If Williams and the others are really involved in covering up murders, they'll be monitoring our communications and activities." She nodded grimly, understanding the paranoia that was now necessary for our survival. As we pulled into the station parking lot, I could see lights on in the administrative offices despite the late hour. Word of Morrison's arrest had apparently reached the command staff, and they were taking an unusual level of interest in what should be a routine burglary case. The attention suggested that Morrison's accusations about corruption had struck close to home. "Whatever happens next," Morrison said as we prepared to take him inside, "remember that good people died trying to expose this conspiracy. Don't let their sacrifice be meaningless by allowing fear to silence the truth." His words carried the weight of someone who had spent 20 years living with the consequences of speaking out against corruption. The storage drive in my pocket contained evidence that could either vindicate Morrison's claims or prove that he was a disturbed former officer seeking revenge against his old department. Either way, Sarah and I now had to decide whether we were willing to risk everything to find out which version of the truth was real. As we walked Morrison into the station, past colleagues who might be innocent or might be accomplices to murder, I realized that our quiet night shift had turned into something that would define the rest of our careers and possibly our lives. The weight of evidence had never felt heavier than it did at that moment, carrying with it the hopes of victims who deserved justice and the fears of a system that might be too corrupt to provide it. Some truths are too dangerous to ignore, no matter what the cost of revealing them might be.